ambient noise, yeah.
So now you're grabbing some band lab clips.
Yeah.
Now for me, that would also be something where I would use like volume automation and like bring that from the bottom, like bring it in and then bring it back out.
And these are the kinds of sounds you can scratch. With this AI, like scratching it actually can be cool.
Oh, that was perfect for the interlude too.
Ends it right in the right
I
spot.
didn't even notice 40. I didn't even realize the texture faded out at the interlude until it happened. I'm like, wait a minute.
Sometimes you just, it was just meant to be that way. And there we are.
Glenn.
Yo, yo.
Dude, your voice sounds so good in that intro, I thought you were actually talking.
Yeah, me too. Sometimes I hear myself and I'm like, wait a minute, where am I? Got to be in there somewhere. There we go. Welcome to another Thursday. Welcome back. And here we all are. We've already got people in the chat hanging out. What's up, No Image? How you doing? Just getting some things ready for tonight's show. We're going to see about some music, some videos.
Aight.
He's aight. That's good. That's better than nah, man. So the question is also on the keyboard volume.
Sound good.
Make sure that's up in there. Not too loud and all that good stuff. How about yours? You got your keyboard over there?
On the other side.
Ah, there you go.
I've got
Perfect.
it hooked up though.
Yep. That's all right. But we got a bunch of things to go over. We've got some videos. Let's see. We had night for videos. A number of different things that we're just going to go over outside the videos, but it's also good to get some reference for them once we do get into the meat of it. We were going to go over on some on MIDI plugins, and we're going to do something on some piano stuff and some chord progression and some things about tone and volume knob secrets as well. So some good stuff for guitar, some good stuff for piano, probably some additional material that we'll go over, and just play around with some music just for fun. And one thing, we don't really do reactions to this show, but you can do is send it over to Angified in a DM, and she'll check it out for one of the other shows where she does take submissions, like on different days of the week, sometimes on a Tuesday or a Wednesday or a Friday, depending on what's going on.
Oh yeah, and if you DM it, we react in the back room all the time.
Yep. Always watching stuff back there. But yeah, that's the best way. Links to the chat, definitely not the way to go for here. Just, we appreciate you sending them from DMs. Good way to do it. Oh yeah, it is almost St. Patty's, that's right.
Yeah.
Who's excited? Who's excited? Who's going out drinking? Now, I'm close enough to New York City where I could get to McSorley's, but I don't think I'm going to because that's just not a great idea going out on St. Patty's. Because I drink enough when I go out regularly, so on St. Patty's it would be a real problem.
And in New York, St. Patty's is a party.
Oh, yes. Absolutely. Not that it's not a party elsewhere, but in New York in particular. New York's always a party, so when you throw St. Patty's on top, it's like, wow, okay. Kicking it up a notch at that point. Definitely gets a little bit crazy. And they might have to take me out at the end of the night in the wheelbarrow, and we don't want that, because I would be a very large wheelbarrow full of drunken guy to get out of your bar.
No, we need a truck to move you.
Yep. We do actually usually have, if my buddy Mike was there, like we usually have with us with the sound gear, we have one small cart that folds up, but it actually has a capacity of like 440 pounds, so we can like put the subs on there, the mains on there. I could jump on top if I want to and ride the thing in. It holds a lot of weight, so it would be just fine for all that. But usually we don't have a nice little ramp to like glide on like that. We usually have to go up steps and stuff with the carts, so it gets a little annoying sometimes, but it's all for the show. Got to get it done.
It's a good thing you're strong.
Yep, true. There is definitely some physicality to the job. Not that anybody else can't do it, but it's a lot easier when I can sit there and walk in with one main in my left hand and one main in my right hand and manage to snake my way through the crowd carrying two speakers. That works out well.
You You can call yourself a professional roadie if you can do that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Opening doors to the speakers too. Sometimes push door, nice and gentle, get that door open. We usually have covers on the speakers anyway to keep them protected, so they're not scratching things up and all that. But just to get them in, then we get the covers off, get them all packed back out. We've got it down to a science. So it's one of those things that you do it enough times, and it's just things make sense. Like the same things that you end up moving the covers like 5 or 6 times after you take them off of something. It's like, you know what? Next time I'm just gonna when I take them off, I'm gonna take them off, put them there once, and then the next time they move, they go outside. And that way I don't have to worry about them until the end of the night when we have no time pressure because everybody else is getting all their stuff together, like all the other musicians on stage. They got to break down all their gear and their mics and their amps and all that. So while they're doing all of that, I can worry about going and getting the rest of the covers and carts and all that kind of good stuff to get the live stuff happening.
Yeah, I'd rather be doing the breakdown than the setup.
Yep. I don't mind either side, actually. They're both good. And the best part is that for a lot of the shows, I end up the time in between is just me being an audience member. So I can just hang out and drink and party with whoever's hanging out because I'm really just starting and stopping a video and just making sure nothing's going crazy. And if Mike needs to step away for a minute, he'll toss me the iPad so that I can, be a circuit breaker in case anything starts feeding back. But it's good. We have fun with it, and we work with a lot of bands, so we meet a lot of really cool people. And the video archive that I have, these guys see the videos that I have in the back all the time. Most of it, most of the bands I work with are cover bands, and they're doing mostly cover songs, so we can't really play it on YouTube that way. But what we can do is do things like I do work with some original bands that have some original material that I can go ahead and share at some point here. So we'll definitely look into getting some of that put together as a little montage or a little even sprinkle a little bit here and there into our shows. We could do that.
Yeah, and even original bands, when they play out, tend to sprinkle their originals around covers.
Yep.
In order to entice an audience and get them comfortable with your music, that's the balance that you have to do.
Yeah. Yeah, you got to keep them interested, but also keep them off balance, Throw them something they don't necessarily recognize, but ideally it's something that they can still dance to if they're out there dancing in the first place. That's one thing is you don't want to kill them with crazy time changes and stuff like that if they're not expecting, because that's how to drive people off the dance floor. If that's if that's what you want though, you could do that.
Yeah,
you want to drive people back to their seats to eat, sure.
and it takes time for a band to get their originals to be familiar enough where if they're headlining, the audience is wanting to go to that club for that original music. So it takes time to get that.
Yeah, trying to build up a following for sure. Definitely takes time. Not easy. But it's also, there's a lot of groups, whether it's like Facebook groups or just, on whatever sites. People have like Meetup. There was one where it's just people, will make a plan online to get together at a particular event venue. Usually it's a bar or a restaurant, and they're going to get together, 10, 15, 20 people all get together to go see a band or whatever. And it's kind of cool. It's the kind of thing that like our group on Zoom, like if we were all physically in the same area, we could be like, hey, let's all meet up down at the whatever. We just, bring that into the the newer way of doing things where you just have a meet and you say, hey, everybody meet up over here and see this band on this day.
Yeah, see, that's one of the cool things nowadays that you have for an option. Like in the old days, you didn't know if there was like somebody jamming somewheres unless somebody told you.
Yep. Old school. But easier. Figure out what's what.
Yeah, bands that are really trying to get themselves out there should all have a Facebook page with their schedule and where they're playing.
Yeah, definitely. The schedule is important, getting the calendar out there. And of course, a mailing list so that, people who want to can just be sent, bam, let them know when you're going to be playing where.
Yeah.
It's easy to do, but so many bands don't do it,
It's one of the few excuses I would say to use Facebook. If you're a band or a business, Facebook's awesome.
Yep. As an individual, I never really was.
Yeah, it's a rabbit
But I
hole
do see
as
the
an
usefulness,
individual.
especially for companies or bands or entities. I could definitely see that being useful.
Yep.
And it depends on kind of following, how much of a following you're trying to get and what you're doing. Exactly. Rafael.
Fuck you too.
No, that's usually on Friday. See, that would be a fuck you Friday thing, not a Thursday thing. It doesn't really go with a Thursday. Friday, no. Not quite a match.
For me, fuck you means hello.
Yeah, that too. And how you doing too?
Oh, fuck you!
Exactly. We could even do the little fuck you song. There you go. Fuck you. But no, there actually is a song that we did up at the mountain one year that, well, it wasn't that we did, but the guy who runs the mountain, one of the big musical events that I go to every year, he would have a song that was just called Fuck You. And he would just be playing his piano and just going through the choruses, and people are singing along, and everybody's having a good old time. So, yeah, it was quite a thing. Oh, by the way, sometimes there is viewer discretion advised because sometimes we swear and we say fuck you and things like that. But it happens. It happens.
Earmuffs.
Be prepared. Yeah, see we're always wearing our earmuffs. So we're always ready. Always ready for the swears. But yes, welcome. Join us as we do music and silliness and videos. And we're going to check out some videos tonight on several topics.
Yeah,
Not sure which one you want to start with.
Well, let's see. We've got the endless piano with 2 chord shapes,
Mm-hmm.
7 super common chords,
Mm-hmm.
no pedals allowed.
Mm-hmm.
That one seems interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
And I've got the MIDI Guitar 2.21 best plugins of 2022.
Nice.
That one we can kind of sprinkle, along the way.
Sure.
He covers a couple of different plugins, so
Mm-hmm.
we'll take them in bite-sized chunks.
Did you want to start with that one, or do you want to start with one of the others?
Well, I can get that loaded up. We can take a look at the first plugin he talks about.
Nice. Some of the other ones that we have coming up, I think, were going to be from David Bennett Piano was one of them, and let me see, the others were Elliot Klein for one of the guitar ones. David Bennett was for the progressions, and Piano with Johnny is for playing endless beautiful piano with 2 chord shapes. And we can definitely check out their pages later as well, because they've all got just really good resources. And again, we've come across so many good resources that you can kind of be overwhelmed. But to me, it's not about trying to see every video of every person that's out there. It's more, seeing all the options of people that are out there doing videos, because some of them you'll connect with the material or the information, even if you don't connect with the person per se. And other ones you'll connect really well with the person, but the material isn't necessarily what you were looking for. But it's just about having the options, because seeing all of the information, I could watch a 20-minute video, and even if only 30 seconds of it was something that was really super relevant, if it was really relevant and it connected things in my head that I didn't make connections with before, it's totally worth the 20-minute input, in my opinion. So that's why I like watching a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, I love that we have these resources these days.
Oh, yeah. Lo-Fi Leaf.
Yeah, now I came across this guy's channel when I was doing all that searching for guitar to MIDI converters.
Mm-hmm.
And, we looked last week at that guitar, the most incredible guitar I think I've ever seen.
Nice.
And that was a hardware solution, the MIDI
Yeah.
pickups built into the guitar.
Mm-hmm.
Ideally, that's what you would want for the fastest response, the lowest latency.
Yep.
But a lot of guitarists, want to be able to play their acts. They are more comfortable with the traditional guitar instrument itself, and using a VST plugin to do MIDI conversion, it is a real thing, and it's really come a long way when it comes to latency and your options.
Mm-hmm.
So this guy, he does a review on the best plugins of 2022 that do this, and some of them are actually free plugins, so there's no reason not to try it if you're a guitarist.
Yeah, exactly. And, if your machine can handle it and all that, and that's one of the things that if you got too many things on there, we talked about that before, freezing tracks to try to free up resources or use less tracks at a time, things like that. There's a number of different ways to try to get around issues if your system can't quite handle it, but
yeah,
definitely good to check them out.
Hardware limitations would be one of the things that you'd have to consider. You need a decent computer to do real-time translation like this,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm sure he's going to probably mention.
Sure.
So let's take a look and see what the first plugin he talks about.
Not long ago I did this video on latency settings and whatnot, and that you should be mindful of what sort of instruments you use with your MIDI Guitar 2 software to get the most pleasant experience. I thought I'd list some of the more important properties or make up some sort of criteria for what would be a decent instrument in my book. The instrument should follow your playing actions to a T, of course. If you bend, the instrument should bend. Shouldn't lag, for instance. If it's adding on extra latency, that's not a good plugin. There are good plugins in this way and there are bad plugins. I don't want to list bad plugins because I don't feel it's fair to the developers, because most of the time they don't develop their instruments with MIDI guitar in mind. But I will show you examples of what's a good plugin and what's a bad plugin for MIDI guitar. Not saying that's a bad plugin per se. So the first plugin you saw was MG Nylon. Plays really well, but it lacks in one really important aspect, and that's the bends part. I can't get it to bend. If you look in the top corner of the contact container, you'll see that they have these cog wheels instead of a wrench, which means that they've locked it insofar as I can't go inside and add the possibilities for me to use bends, for instance. Even though that I would say that the MG Nylon is one of the best software nylon string guitars that I've played. Or you can try to play it in the free version as a decent sampler instrument. And the big problems I have with these kinds of instruments are most often the lack of dynamic layers. There's nothing to the details that would indicate I'm striking a harder note. And these might be small details, but they are important to the overall experience. So don't necessarily go for these cheaper ones if you are in the middle of investigating whether or not the MIDI Guitar 2 software is an option for you or not. I advise you to at least try this out. The decent sampler isn't at all a bad container, but it's quite obvious that there is more work that has been done to the one in the contact container. So that's a good instrument to start with for that very reason. Still on the subject of a plugin's playability, and say with a guideline like it being a help and not a hindrance, we're now going to look at piano plugins. And with regard to the last example, it's really important that we look at pianos that have many dynamic layers, because otherwise every mistake you're gonna do is gonna come out on that single layer and it's gonna sound more severe than it actually is. That's why I suggest we look at the Ravenscroft 275 that I normally use, but you can also use Native Instruments Maverick or Mod Arch Piano Tech, for instance. The first argument for Ravenscroft 275 is obviously the sheer playability. This plugin follows me anywhere. High, low, soft, hard, doesn't matter. It's beautiful everywhere. And the second argument is this possibility for me to use all three pedals on my sustain pedal. Further on to the next plugin. If you need some extra arguments for choosing piano tech, look at all the instruments that you can buy from it as in-app purchases. And also look at the wonderful possibility of using external tuning files that you import and retune your whole instrument to whatever crazy tuning you like. So up next, here's the Native Instruments Maverick. Also have a bonus with Ivory 2. That's a perky little piano that I used to use for my Chicoria stuff in the beginning. Here I meant to show you plugins that met the playability criteria in terms of not lagging or follow your playing exactly. Left is the bends, and closely associated with that we have vibrato, which is really a function of bends if you think about it. If you can use bends in an instrument, you can also use your personal vibrato that you would use on your guitar for the instrument that you're trying to control. And that gives you sort of a personal connection that I think is unique for these kind of controllers. You have it with like Rolly C boards and stuff like that, but with guitar I think it's even closer. So I'm gonna take you on a detour into the synth world to begin with. So first out we have Noisy from Expressive E, or the guys behind the Touché, you may know it. They also have two other synths, Lié and Imagine, that are very good for MIDI guitar as well. This little device where I layer two instruments and separate them by using the breath controller for, in this case, the saxophone, I've picked up from Michael Brecker, and this kind of naturally leads into the next clip with the UVI OB Legacy synth and the harmonizer I use for the Brecker chord rotator stuff. The obvious advantages with using a harmonizer is that you get chords moving behind the single lines that you play instead of playing those chords, which is kind of a problem for MIDI guitar sometimes. I'm going to use the same kind of device as I move into the realm of Reason. Earlier Propeller Head's Reason, but nowadays it's Reason Studios. Reason has a lot of devices that work really well for MIDI guitar. One of their standout instruments is their Friction. Talk about an instrument that follows your playing to a T. The next part is going to be along the same lines. We're talking about a vocoder. And Reason recently dropped a new vocoder called BVX. While still on this subject of vocoders and harmonizers, let's look at the Waves version. In this case, it's kind of special. I have one Waves plugin per string. So actually triggering one string doesn't trigger the same sort of setting in waves as the next string. So I have this setup with an hexaphonic pickup on my guitar that separates the output into 6 different streams, and I have one harmonizer per string. Tie a little ribbon around this chapter of synths and playability and stuff. If you like the idea of having one harmonizer per string, you might want to look at this, where I use one instrument per string instead. Why do you want to use MIDI guitar? Could be a valid question. And I would say because it adds so very much to the actual creation process. You can do things with ease that you otherwise would have to spend days to create. So I wouldn't want you to think that MIDI guitar is going to take over all those chores that you have as a performer, composer, instrumentalist, or whatever. I mean, you might think that you're better at playing guitar than you're at piano, so you should use MIDI guitar software instead. But I mean, it's not going to cover all those cases. But having said that, having knowledge of the software you're going to be working with is key in this case. Very much like the earlier stuff with the harmonizer and with vocoder, I can use another software to bring in voicings in this case. So I'm just playing a melodic line, and I have the Divisimate software in this case breaking this up and playing a lot of voices with whatever kind of orchestra that I'm putting together that I have in my sort of library. In this case, I have the SWAM instruments. The first one was with a trumpet on top, and the other one is with an alto sax. This was something that I could have done on my 4-track back in the days. It's only 2 recordings really. I've improvised the orchestral part with my MIDI guitar setup first, and then I improvised the trumpet part on top of that later. So that's how easy it is when you know your software. With nothing to hide, what I know, I want you to know. So here's all those plugins and instruments that I think are the best ones. On the top of my list, almost every time I start a session, is the sample modeling, either trumpet or the flugelhorn. I mean, I think they're so good instruments. It's funny because they're in this contact container, and usually contact instruments aren't that good at following MIDI guitar. These are. With a breath controller, I would absolutely put them in my best category. Having mentioned sample modeling, I can't avoid mentioning the audio modeling SWAM instruments. I mean, I use them all, and I use them all the time. I couldn't tell you enough great things about the audio modeling instruments. So I'll show you a clip of all the sort of different audio modeling instruments that I have done something with over the years here. I guess you've realized already that I'm quite fond of wind synths and anything that is controllable via this breath controller. Those instruments are written in a way that usually supports bends really well, and that's not always the case perhaps with instruments that are written for piano. So let me introduce at least two dedicated wind synths. Here's the Evine.
Wow, we've got some plugins to download in the next week.
Some solid stuff there. I really liked the breath controller that he was using for everything. Was very, very cool.
Yes, that's actually a big surprise for me. Like I was looking for the guitar MIDI conversion, which that MIDI guitar too.
Hmm.
Can you believe the responsiveness
Yeah,
that
that's crazy.
like the strings and the brasses
Hmm.
sound incredible, and with the breath controller,
Yeah,
he
the amount of
solves
emotion you can get into it for sure.
he solves that problem of like swells and bends and some of the things that like don't translate well from the
Hmm.
MIDI guitar.
Yep.
With the breath controller, you get a level of dynamics that brings all that right back.
One thing I will say is that I feel like the guitar with the bends and all, like if we take the breath controller even out of the picture, I think guitar gives you more expressive, more intuitive expressive control than keyboard does. Like for keyboard, you can get dynamics loud and soft very easily. You can use the pitch and the bend wheels and all that, and you can use them very well. But it feels almost more intuitive when you're playing guitar, just because whatever note you're hitting, if you want to bend it, you don't have to go grab something else. You just literally, bend that string. You just hit it a little harder and push up. So it's like you can get that anywhere, and you can get very expressive with those bends and with a whammy bar and with volume control. You can get all that on a guitar while playing the notes. So I feel like the guitar is a little bit more. Is a little bit easier of an input device, let's say, than the keyboard for the MIDI stuff. Although the keyboard is for certain, more associated with MIDI
Well,
for
yeah, with the
historically.
keyboard, you're hitting the mod wheel and
Hmm.
the pitch wheel, which means one of your hands has to stop doing something in order to
Yep.
do. With the
Unless you were
guitar,
using something like that breath controller, could also be used for keyboard because you're not using your breath for keys. So you could use that as an inflection thing if you could program it for that. You could say, hey, I want to use this breath controller for the same purpose that you were doing it for the guitar while you're playing keyboard. And that way both hands are still on the keys, but you're getting that expressiveness through the breath controller.
yeah, I can't believe how naturally he does it too. He makes
Oh, yeah.
it look easy.
Well, it also, we were talking about it at one time, how it affects your phrasing. If you were to sing what you're playing on whatever instrument it is, not for the purpose that you're planning on singing it on stage or planning on singing the notes that you would be playing, but by singing the line that you're playing, it helps you decide on a line that includes the space, the timing that you would need to take for breathing, so that there is that pause at least every once in a while. So it's not just a flurry of like a lot of people get into that trap,
you
where
know,
once
and,
they learn to play a lot of notes, they play a lot of notes.
for anybody out there who's trying to learn how to sing and play guitar,
Hmm.
that's probably really useful.
Hmm.
Probably helps a lot to practice with that.
Sure. And I see it just as a really good connection of getting something other than both hands, connected with the sound. Kind of like getting a foot pedal involved. If you're playing keyboard and you can get good with, a volume pedal, whether you're using it for swells all the time or using it almost like a wah, or if you're just using it, this patch is louder than that patch, so let me back it off a little bit with the volume pedal. Like that's a good way to use it, where you don't have to get your hands off the keys to adjust something. And that way, if you can hear, how loud your volume is, and you can see, oh, this patch is much louder, to bring it down. If you're going song to song like that.
Yeah, and he brought up a great point. One useful thing when you're doing MIDI guitar like this, being able to change the tuning
Hmm.
without having to change the tuning on the guitar.
Right, right.
A guitarist can go to like drop D
Hmm.
without even messing with the guitar.
Yep. And then some people use a pedal for that. Like in a couple of people that I know, they have in their pedal rig, it's a the drop zone, I think it was called, a red pedal. But you can drop down as much as an octave. And it's basically the same kind of an idea as a rocker pedal, like for the volume, but you can choose how many half steps you want to go down or up, so that if you did want to just play and not have to retune the guitar, but you want to play a song that's in, drop D tuning, or, any kind of D standard, whatever,
Yeah, yeah.
you can just bring it down that way.
You got one guitar on the stage with you, and
Hmm.
you want to play different songs that need different kinds of tuning.
Hmm.
You can flip them with a button.
Yep. And not have to worry about the tuning, in between and all of that. It's helpful.
Yeah,
But a lot of people, they don't pay too much attention to tuning anyway. It is something to be aware of, an important thing to be aware of. When you're doing keyboard, you never have to think about tuning pretty much, but with the stringed instruments, you really got to pay attention.
well, it's funny. I'm constantly asking guitarists these days what tuning they're in, because it seems like nobody tuned standard anymore.
Well, the good news is that it wouldn't really matter unless you're trying to mimic what they're doing by looking at their hand. Like if you're looking at their hand and you say, "Hey, I don't recognize that claw. Like, what tuning are you in?" That makes sense in that context. But if it's just if you're trying to find what they're playing, like you're trying to match what they're playing, and you hear them, playing doo 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 doo, like what key is that in? It's just or what tuning is it in? You can just find it by just hunt your way around until you find the matching tone for the root, and then you can build from there and figure out whether that's a minor one or a major one. You can hear those kinds of things as far as the intervals go. Like you'd know if it's there's a big difference between those two. So you can hear that if it's just those little pieces, and then it's as the chord gets bigger and busier is where it gets a little more complicated. But like minor 7 and dominant 7 and major 7, you get all three types right there. And that's one of the ones I was going to talk about also is the 2-5-1, which that was. There's like taking, in the key of C, for example, if you just take a 2-5-1 would be the D minor, in this case D minor 7. And then I just move the top 2 down and I'm making it a G, dominant 7, and then move the bottom 2 down and make it a C, major 7. And we'll look at that once I get the Meticulous up, and I'll go full screen with that so we can see what it looks like, but it doesn't have to be right now. I just like the sound of it. Like the 2-5-1, it's got that nice resolving sound, and by using that inversion in the middle, it keeps the forms nice and close together. And we can transpose it to any key.
Well, we'll finish this one up and we'll check that out.
Yeah, cool.
Minor or EVI from Davidson Audio. The way I like to use them is obviously to add something to this. I'm going to add this waves harmonizer that I was talking about earlier. So adding something as easy as a harmonizer may help in fattening the sound or something like this, and you can also make harmonies that change behind it, but it's usually as easy as picking a wind synth preset and perhaps applying some sort of effect on it, and you're done. The other dedicated wind synth I'm interested in is Emox Plus Respiro. Has these lovely breathy qualities, and it's also a breeze to assign something to it. So I'm using it in the next clip in a more experimental way, where I use the bite part of my breath sensor to control noise level and timbre. And those clicking sounds you heard in the beginning takes us into the next category of special forces, or some effects, perhaps. Let's first look at Inouye samples, the stack and slap sax, the baritone. That was where I took the clicking sounds, and those are the key sounds from the baritone that's sampled and put together into this library. In the same way as I describe a harmonizer or a vocoder as a sort of essential addition to the MIDI Guitar 2 setup, I can't deny you Output's Portal. It's not an instrument per se, They themselves call it a granular synthesis FX plugin, and it's gonna chop out your output and make all kinds of weird stuff with it, but it's musical in all respects. I mean, if you put it on the output of whatever you're playing, it's certainly gonna be a musical experience, and it's gonna be something you can play against and something unexpected. So it's definitely part of my special forces. Native Instruments Spotlight Series East Asia getting the output portal treatment. Leads kind of nicely into the world of world instruments, and again I have a few developers that has sort of focused on wind instruments that I want to showcase. And, let's start with Sonopuro and their Ancient Flutes library. The interesting part is how much difference every note gets from the way you actually play it. So that was a combination patch of Sonic Couture's Gusheng and a piano, I think it's a Maverick, and Sonopuro's new DC. And next we'll have the Sonic Kinetic Oud, and we'll have a combination of the Dr. Chow and the Super Duduk, both from Sonopuro. What kind of walkthrough would this be if we didn't have some sort of software representation of something like this? The Erhu, Chinese or Asian violin. We're gonna go back to the Friction synth in Reason to begin with for their version of this. I'm going to look at another Erhu as well, and this comes from Ample Sounds. Ample Sounds is one of those companies that comes out with these super detailed instruments, perfect for solo pieces or duo pieces. And the first Ample Sound instrument that I came across was this wonderful upright bass that I wanted to use for my jazzier stuff at the time. And while still on the subject of upright basses, let me mention Have Audio's Nordisk contrabass as one of my standout basses to use. It's most enjoyable in all its variation. It's got a lot of different articulations, but it suffers unfortunately from being in this contact container, which makes it less than perfect as a performance tool for MIDI guitar. But then again, we can make that work to our advantage instead. If I want to make a Pat Metheny GR300, I wouldn't want to have it super slick and working in all ways. The part where it's kind of unpredictable, it has its charm. So setting up in a contact container might be the best thing for that. On the other hand, while doing my DIY syntax video a while ago, I learned that control in all areas most of the time is of course the thing we want most. And this is all I'm trying to do with this MIDI guitar project that I've been working on, trying to sort out which of the plugins that actually work this way. I couldn't get them all in this video, of course, but for now I think it's a good representation of what's out there. I'm looking forward to MPE implementation in the future, and there are going to be a lot of other synths to pick up on this list, so hopefully I'll be doing another video on that in the near future. Till then, bye.
Awesome. I definitely love the amount of expressiveness, as you mentioned, is just crazy.
Yeah, I'm blown away at how natural he can make some of the winds, that flute pack that he was showing from Native Instruments. I want that flute.
Put it on Tony's Christmas list.
Come on, Santa.
Get it for him. Get it for him. Oh, with that view, I can't get the full page in, so we'll go back to that.
Yeah, so that was Lo-Fi Leaf over on YouTube. And I will be checking out some more. Like, he really is diving into the MIDI world from a guitarist point of view. And any of you guitarists out there, like, I hope this kind of gets you thinking of possibilities there. The responsiveness that he's getting out of a VST plugin as he plays, I mean,
crazy,
that's encouraging.
Yeah, and a lot of it, to me, it reminds me of like the Chapman stick, just in terms of responsiveness in some of those patches and some of those demonstrations, like the ones where he was playing with the headless guitar with the foam wrap. I mean, a lot of it was with that one, but just the fact that it just seems like you can just tap any of the frets anywhere and it would just make the sound immediately, where you don't have to necessarily fret and pick or pluck at the same time. Which just makes it so much faster. It's kind of like tapping, where you can just, you have certain patches will be active enough where you can just press the strings. I can do it a lot of times just with the bass also. Like if I have to, fake a note here or there to get something real quick, like turn something up on the amp or whatever. If you have to go make that move, like you can just fret a note really hard with the fretting hand and it'll still come through. You don't want to get too fancy with that though. But pull-offs and hammer-ons are even better, because with a hammer-on you can actually add more energy to it. And a pull-off if you do it in the right way. But yeah, just little ways that you can make notes, with just the fretting hand if you need to, even if you don't have a very loud patch. But with a loud patch, it makes it easier. And again, a lot of good resources. For me, like, I haven't checked out this channel too much yet, but I would definitely get into it, especially just from seeing that.
Yeah, look at what he's covering here.
The breath controller alone was worth the price of admission, and all the guitar stuff is bonus.
Yeah, I had no idea he was going to be utilizing a breath. I had no idea there was a breath controller like this. I want to see if I can utilize it on the keyboard. And
that's the thing, is that breath controller, and he also mentioned the bite, aspect of it. Like, there's actually, it'll respond to how much you're biting down on it as well as how much you're breathing through it. So there's ways that it actually works in terms of numerous parameters, let's put it that way, that you can control in different ways at the same time. Because that way you're playing and you can also do this and you can also do that. And you also have feet. So it's like all of a sudden you're getting everything involved like a drummer.
I really like that he's going through all the Contact 7 stuff too, because I've been looking at this one for a while now. Been wanting to add Contact to the arsenal.
Yeah.
Once I can get some hard drive space on my music machine, they give you like massive libraries.
Oh, I don't doubt it. Lots of good stuff that you need to get to there for sure.
Yeah, do-it-yourself syntax guide. That's another one I'm going to be checking.
Yep. Microtonal tunings. Ooh, no.
Yeah, I love these channels that like really go deep diving into these subjects. I mean, this guy's really a MIDI master.
Nice. And I would be a beginner when it comes to the MIDI stuff for sure. Like I get what things are and all that, but like the actual workflow and all that, that's definitely not something that I've, gotten used to or done much with. MIDI parts here and there, but for the most part, I just record whatever I'm going to do because I can do it on instruments, whatever I'm doing, so I'll just do whatever it is. But a lot of times, if it's a drum thing, I would have to split the part. If I wanted to get like a real sounding drum part, I would probably just do kick snare on one go around and then come back around and do anything, any tom rolls and things like that, accents, all that kind of thing. Try to get a really steady hi-hat, all that, because if the hi-hat's even just off a little, it just really throws the whole thing off. And again, the way to do it ideally would just be to do a short loop for something like that. Like you just do, a 1-bar loop with the hi-hat going, where you get it just perfect one time through and you get that loop going around. And then you can just, add dynamics around it by doing other parts or other accents with other cymbals and everything else.
Yeah, and for those that are like new to MIDI, drums is your best excuse. If you use MIDI for nothing else, drums these days is the one thing that like every musician at some point or another needs drums, and MIDI drums are the norm.
Yep. And even like right under this keyboard right here is a drum set. That's like, these are the cymbals are up over here. It's not hooked up right now just because, I have the keyboard. I'm using it as a keyboard stand. So I have my keyboard sitting on top of the tom and the snare. But it's there. And, I don't tend to play them often because it is just, it's like one of the cheapest electric sets you can get. It's not the mesh heads, but it's just like a big solid plastic piece that has, 3 pads that are, have a good bounce to them at least. So with that good rubber bounce, at least it feels, if you're getting the targeting right, which the heads are, the spots you're trying to hit are pretty small. So it's like precision targeting. So it's like if I can get good at hitting these consistently, then my targeting will be very good when I sit at an actual drum kit because they're in the right positions and they're small targets.
Yeah, and for those who aren't necessarily like they don't want to have to physically play the drums, Easy Drummer, I've been playing around with that for the last couple of months, and it's a nice compromise. I mean, you get patterns galore, and you deal more with the arrangement of the patterns.
Right.
And
it's more of a Lego brick approach where you don't have to, get hung up on getting good takes of this recording or good timing on that recording. You're just more focused on making the song by bricking in each of these parts. And then once you've got it into what you want, even for section by section, you get your section built out and then boom, okay, now what are we going to do before that or after that or whatever?
Yeah, my biggest challenge is not getting like overwhelmed by all the patterns.
Yeah.
Because you could literally sit there for hours just sampling different patterns and clips. The nice thing with it though is it does categorize them, and it does have a nice search engine for if you're looking for a certain kind of beat or a certain kind of genre.
Yep.
You can kind of start there and focus on patterns that fit under that.
And as you're picking one,
but you still get hundreds of them. So
well, sure,
it's like, which one am I gonna use?
Well, it's also like some of them are 8-bar patterns or 4-bar patterns or 1-bar pattern turnarounds or whatever. Like they classify them that way as well. So like if you're looking for a specific function in a section of a song, whether it's a verse or a chorus or again an ending or whatever, they have them broken out in a way that you can take the smaller bricks and say, okay, 1 bar of this, 1 bar of this, 1 bar of this. If you wanted to have something totally change up at the end or something.
Yeah.
And that would have it sound more organic or natural or what have you, or it might make it just sound totally disjointed. It depends on which ones you put together. If you put a polka together with something else and then this over here, it might be like, and like it all doesn't work at all.
No,
As long as everything
surprisingly,
flows well, though, that's the question.
you start layering a couple of drum tracks together. The nice thing is it keeps it all in tempo, and
Hmm.
I mean, obviously you're not going to be throwing a 3/4 on top of a 4/4 and expecting perfect synchronization, but
Hmm. You should. Comes back around every 12.
yep.
4 of these and 3 of those.
Yeah,
Get you 3 of those and 4 of them.
we'll have to do an easy drummer night
Hmm.
once I manage. And Jason, actually, he's the one I need to pick his brain because he's been using it for a long
Yeah.
time now.
Yeah. And I remember, I think it was MT Drummer was the other one that was similar. That was another free option that we had looked at one point on the show as well. So that's
Yeah,
another.
MT is the perfect, free alternative.
Mhm.
And all those MIDI clips and loops that are available over there
Mhm.
will work in the MT. I mean, the MT
Mhm.
is basically a MIDI arranger for drums.
Yep. And that's the thing is, once you kind of get used to the style of how you can build these parts and then just drag the parts into your project and boom, there you go. If you're doing it that way, or you can just, again, find things that are already kind of put together and put them together brick by brick, where you can put a whole section together with just, 8 bars of this, 8 bars of this, and 8 bars of that. But again, you can get more involved with it as you use it more. You'll find, ways that you want to make it more, or less generic sounding, let's say, or more individualized by taking, little pieces. And even if you take an 8-bar phrase and just take the first 2 bars of it and then do something else, you can do things like that as well, where you don't have to use the full phrase. If they give you an 8-bar phrase, doesn't mean you have to use the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and the only real difference between the MT and Easy Drummer, where you get what you pay for with Easy Drummer, you get extra kits. I mean,
Right.
they've got drum kits that can fit all sorts of styles and genres.
Mhm.
MT, you got your basic kit, and if you really want a different kit, then you have to send it to a MIDI drum module.
Mhm. Yeah. And that was the thing. I didn't mess too
But
much
it's
with the
free.
kits. Like they do have just even if they only had 5 or 6 kits, like if they had a rock kit and a metal kit and a this kit and a that, and a percussion kit or whatever, you can go through a couple of different options. Even if there's only a few options, you can still get a whole lot of variation out of that just by
Oh,
with the
yeah.
different grooves they already have, and then change the kit up to say, oh, with this groove it doesn't sound quite right with the kit that it's on, but boom, change the kit and it'll sound like it should.
Yeah, I have like maybe 80, 90 kits, but there's only like 3 or 4 that are my go-tos in the rock kit,
Hmm.
both on my Roland, and the rock kit and the Halion
Mhm.
sampler are my go-tos.
Yeah, nice.
And once in a while I go to the brush. I like the jazz
Yeah.
brush kits.
Yeah, and actually, that's what I was playing when we went to the studio on Wednesday. I played a little bit with the brushes. The brushes I have are nylon, so it's just they have like tubes of like thin nylon or fiberglass. It might be, I don't
They
know.
give them a little pluck when a little splash.
Kind of, yeah. It's like they don't splash apart as much, and they don't have as metallic a sound as most brushes would. But it just keeps the volume nice and low. And I was just doing like rim taps with the one stick, and as I'm doing the cymbal stuff, you can just kind of just barely hit the cymbal, and you just get a little bit of a ring out of it, rather than it being a big crash, because it's a small studio room, so you don't want to. We're not trying to overpower the whole thing. We're just jamming anyway. So I was just trying to keep a steady thing going, and I found myself just falling into the same groove all the time though with it, like the kick drum. It's like one, kick, snare, kick, snare, kick, snare, kick, snare, and like once I got like on that train, I was just on that train for like 10 minutes straight, and like trying to fill things in here and there, but sometimes I try to do too much, you get a little too fancy, and you end up you miss a kick here or there or whatever.
I can never get my feet like synchronized with my hand.
I did try to get the left foot involved too. That's one thing I almost never would do, is get the left foot involved, because trying to lift that left foot to get the psh, like tss, 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 psh, like getting all that going at the same time, because then you're coming like psh, on that one, and then you're coming back down as the other one's coming back down while you're doing this and looking for that.
Was it you or Ange who said depending on whether you're left-handed or right-handed, your dominant foot is the other one?
I think when we were talking about stepping away from the wall, like if you step away from a wall, is it your left foot or your right foot that feels more natural? And I thought it was usually whichever your dominant is. Like if you step away with your right foot first, it means you're right-handed, or right hand. intended to be right-handed, let's say, or predetermined or predestined to be right-handed, or vice versa with the other way, unless there's a reason that changed what would have been your dominant. But the same thing when we were talking about like crossing the
Like
hands together, which thumb is
like
on top.
like if you like broke your leg when you were
Right,
young.
exactly, and that would be a different reason for favoring a different leg. But like when you hold your hands together and you have your thumbs, crossed on the top here, does it feel right if it's the right hand on
That
top, the left hand on
oh,
top, or does one feel right and one feel wrong?
that is the truth. I know I'm left-handed for sure because this is how I cross my
Left
hands.
thumb on top, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Yep, and I'm the same way. Like I'm a I'm a righty as far as everything I've ever done has always been righty. But I've always been kind of somewhat both. Like I can write with my left hand if I want to. And I do a lot of things like playing guitar and playing piano and things that require dexterity in both hands. So it's one of those things where you kind of get not quite ambidextrous because I don't practice writing with the left hand. So it wouldn't be good penmanship if I tried to write something with my left hand. But my right hand was never good penmanship either. I was always had like doctor's handwriting. So one of those things.
Yeah,
But
see,
yeah.
I did break my left arm a lot when I was young.
Hmm.
Learning to, do it with my right hand, even writing, because for a couple of years I broke my arm 5 times before I was 11, and it was
Hmm.
always my left arm. So I learned to write a little bit with my right hand. I bat actually right-handed instead of left-handed.
Hmm. Yep.
There's certain things that during those years I ended up kind of becoming a righty,
Hmm. One of my
even
buddies
though
was a lefty. He
I
would
am a
golf righty.
dominant left.
He would golf righty because he had access to righty clubs more easily than lefty clubs. So he learned that way, and just then from that time, golfing and baseball and everything was always he bat
Well,
as a righty.
that's why I learned how to play guitar
Hmm.
right-handed, was
Hmm.
because the only guitars I had access to were all right-handed. Even
Sure.
though if I air guitar, this is
Hmm.
how I air guitar just naturally,
Right.
which means I should try a left-handed guitar.
Hmm.
I feel like it's what I
One
should
thing
be
is
playing.
you literally can take even a guitar that isn't correct for you. Like it depends if you're trying to do individual notes or if you're trying to do chords. It won't feel right whichever you're doing. But if you think about it, the middle two strings on the guitar aren't that much different. So that if you
Yeah.
were whether you're a righty or a lefty, if you're just doing those middle two strings, you could just sit there. If you're just doing little phrases, like just doing little up and down, 1, 2, 3 type stuff. If you can like get the timing and get the hands to work together for that kind of a thing, where you're actually plucking and fretting and getting notes. It doesn't matter what the notes are really. I would really, if you were just going to focus on 3 different patterns, it would just be like a 1, 2, 4, a 1, 3, 4, and a 1, 3, 5. And if you can get those 3 different shapes down, then you can do any of the modes that we've talked about so many times
Have you
for
ever
guitar.
have you ever tried to play
Oh yeah,
a righty flipped over with the strings still upside down?
it's ugly. Yeah, it doesn't
Well,
work.
yeah,
It almost doesn't
I
work at all.
I
It's like,
actually I actually
what am I
know a
doing?
guitarist in Connecticut. One of the friends me and Lou have,
Mhm.
he plays left-handed, but he plays a right-handed string guitar, and the way he riffs and solos,
It'll sound totally different. Yeah.
it's reversed. So his riffs almost come across like, reversed.
Yeah. And if someone was trying to imitate the style and they were doing it with the guitar the proper way, it would never really sound right because you can't really
Yeah.
get those same types of, whether it's the pull offs
Well,
or whether it's the way your
it's
fingers lay across the strings.
it's like he's getting an upstroke when he
Hmm.
goes, down.
Yep. Yep. And again, it depends if you're doing individual notes or if you're doing chord stuff, whether it's even just dyads, 2 notes at a time. That kind of thing. Good stuff, though. Yeah, I like
Yeah.
that. Good controller, and I just any kind of innovative controls for musical instruments is good, and any kind of getting into the breath instruments, getting realistic sounding breath instruments out of something that you can do through a computer is amazing,
Yeah,
because not having to go get a saxophone and get an oboe and get this, like you
it,
can just
it
get those sounds from something that can do it.
it's funny because I was almost gonna pick an Aerophone, the
Yeah,
Roland
yeah, yeah,
Aerophone
exactly.
video for tonight, because the breath control
Hmm.
MIDI instruments I've been looking at for years,
Hmm.
and even met a couple of people on BandLab who have one and do incredible sax and brass work with this thing.
Yep.
That's another one in the future list of cool controllers that Tony wants.
Yep. I think the last one we had talked about a little bit was the drum controller, right, for the percussion stuff. We talked about that for the pads, not little pads like not like those little pads, but you know, the big pads that you could hit, almost like a hang drum, I guess it was, round.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What was that? The
The Roomba. It almost looked like a Roomba.
yeah, shit. I can't believe I brain farted on.
We'll come back to it. But yeah, it was another controller that was for mostly for percussion or for drum stuff, right? As far as what you want to do.
The
Tonga.
Tonga, the
Nice.
Tonga.
Got it. The Tonga.
Yeah, just had to access the database.
But that would be cool as well. And again, anything that we can, you know, utilize as a controller for MIDI and be able to just, you know, especially with MIDI programming now being as easy as going into learn mode for things and say, you know, learn and then go to the controller and wiggle something and it goes, oh, that, okay, yeah, what do you want to control with that? And you say, oh, I want to control this. And it's just, boom, you linked it to it and now you can just control it with that for the track.
And
So even
now,
on making adjustments during playback, you can do that.
now they're getting so good. I mean, these VST plugins, what they're basically doing is taking audio and just translating it into the MIDI equivalent. So, you know, it's recognizing the pitch that's being played and it's translating it into a MIDI note data. And it's the expression and things that, like, you know, what he was talking about. That's why he used the breath controller, was to add that expression that the guitar itself doesn't lend itself to the MIDI translation.
Yeah.
So if you can't bend and do the things that you want to do with a guitar as you're translating it to MIDI, adding that expression through wind or an expression pedal
Yep.
gives you the and MIDI does have like all the control events for these things. It's just that, like, when you're trying to bend with a guitar and it's not a MIDI guitar, the bends don't pick up in the translation as accurate.
Yeah, and that was the question again, because the bends are really where it comes out in a guitar. The bends and the tremolos, and that's where, you know, you can mimic them on a keyboard. But if you had a guitar controller that would pick those types of things up on its own, that would be great. The one that had we looked at the other day had like the touchpad as a way to do that kind of a thing, or the buttons that you could do other things with all right on the guitar.
Yeah, he actually programmed that touchpad to do those MIDI events, so that way, like, he didn't need a breath controller because he could just use the touchpad to do it.
Yep. But in that case, you still have to use, you know, one of your fingers to make that happen, right? So it's like the breath controller would take it completely literally out of your hands, so that you can, you know, use both hands for the things that you need to use your hands for while doing something additional with either a pedal, like you said, or the breath controller. Very
And
cool.
the one this guy was using tonight, like, that looks very unobtrusive. You know, it's not like those big harmonica like monsters.
Yeah, yeah.
He looked like, you know, it didn't even get in his way. It looked very natural for him.
Yep. And again, gets a very natural sound for the winds, which is very cool. Hard to do that otherwise.
I wonder if he's done any harmonica examples, because that was made for that patch.
Indeed. And that's where probably it would be set for, you know, whether you're blowing extra hard, you know, you get a bend out of it, or do you get more of an overblow, because it depends what you're doing with harmonica. It would be interesting to see how they program it.
And how you map the MIDI events. You know, if you say the breath controller is going to send expression MIDI events, then that's what it's going to change.
Yep. It's all controllable. Now, two of the ones that we have for today were on piano. One of them is piano. The other one is just about chord progressions. But let's do the, how about how I play Endless Beautiful Piano with two chord shapes. We could do that one.
This
That one was from...
Is that Elliot Klein?
Nope, that would be the guitar one. We'll come to that one. That's the no pedals.
Oh,
this would be...
Is this the piano with Johnny?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, this one was the seven super common chord progressions.
That's the one from David Bennett. Yep. But the one that's how I play Endless Beautiful Piano was, you're right, the second time there, with Piano with Johnny. I have that one as...
I've got his tab.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is his YouTube channel.
Mm-hmm. Piano with Johnny. Yep, that's it. Definitely some good stuff in this one. It's again playing using two shapes and playing different chord progressions and managing to get like just a really nice soloing sound out of it just by using two particular shapes.
Ah, here it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I am now subscribed. I already know I'm gonna like this one.
Oh yeah. Definitely some good stuff on his channel as well.
Alright, do you want to be able to just sit at your piano and play beautiful music, but you're not sure where to start? Well, many teachers would show you some basic major chords, and then they would say, well, you know, you can just improvise on these chords, but you're not going to get that more beautiful, interesting sound that I was playing at the beginning of this video. You see, to get this sound, you do not want to play scales up and down the piano, but instead, you want to play chord shapes. And so in today's lesson, I want to show you two of the best chord shapes that you can use on major chords to instantly make them sound more interesting and beautiful. So let's go ahead and dive in. All right, for this lesson, we're going to use two very simple chords in the left hand as the basis of our improvisation. Okay, so I'll show you all this cool stuff in the right hand in just a bit. But for the left hand, we're using a simple F major chord, F and C. And then we're going to a C major chord, E and C, okay? These chords come from like an F major, and we're just dropping the third out. And then this chord comes from a C major, and we're just dropping the G out. All right, next I'm going to show you these beautiful cluster shapes, but before we do this, if you're enjoying this lesson, please hit the like button, and if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe for more videos just like this. All right, my friends, are you ready to learn these beautiful cluster shapes? I want to play them once more for you, and then I'm going to break down exactly what I'm doing. Lovely. I am not just playing major chords or, you know, a C major scale up the piano, but instead I'm thinking of these two chord shapes, and so that's what I want to show you. Okay, first chord, F major. We're going to do a little focus on this chord, and then we'll talk about the C chord. Okay, so the first shape I want to show you is what I call the 7 chord shape, okay? And it looks like this. Isn't that beautiful? Okay, we have E, F, G, and C. Okay? Now here's the way to think about this particular chord shape. If I started on F and I play an F scale only using white notes, and we think of each note of the scale as a number, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You can actually build this chord shape using this little formula. 7, 1, 2, and 5. Okay? So here's the scale. We're going to go 7, 1, 2, and 5. There's that chord shape. Isn't that lovely? And so this is the trick to remembering this chord shape. It's 7, 1, 2, 5, and I call it the 7 shape because it's built on the 7, okay? So go ahead and play this up and down the piano, and it already sounds just beautiful playing it in all of the octaves. Now I'm going to show you exactly how to improvise with this chord shape, but before we do this, I want to show you the second way of playing this chord shape. And for this one, I call it the 2 shape. Check it out. Isn't that beautiful? Does not sound like an ordinary F major chord, okay? So now we have the notes G, C, E, and F. And believe it or not, these are the same notes as the 7 shape, but we're just inverting the chord. So we're taking these bottom 2 notes, E and F, and we're putting them on the top. Okay? And so these are the 2 chord shapes that you're going to want to master to get this beautiful improvisational sound. Doesn't that sound lovely? So let's briefly review these two chord shapes. I'm going to show you an exercise to master these shapes. We'll do a little improv together, and then I'll show you how to do this on our other chord, which is C major. Okay, so chord is F. Here's shape number 1. That's the 7 shape. And then this is shape number 2. And by the way, we call this the 2 shape because it's built on the second note of the F scale. Okay, so 7 shape, 2 shape. And then play this up the piano. 7 shape, 2 shape. Does that make sense? And then you can bring it down the piano. 7 shape, 2 shape, 7. Okay, so you want to get comfortable seeing these shapes on the piano, and I would encourage you to play it up and down the piano until you're nice and comfortable playing these shapes. By the way, I wanted to mention that the technical name for this chord is called an F major 9. And basically the way this chord works is you're going to play an F major and keep stacking thirds to where you have a 7th, F major 7, and then one more third, which makes a 9th chord, F major 9. Okay, but we're just sort of redistributing the notes a little bit. But don't worry if the chord names don't make sense, they will make sense over time. All right, I want to show you a quick exercise to kind of get these chord shapes in your fingers, and it basically goes like this. Okay, it's actually a really pretty exercise. And what I'm doing is I'm starting on my 7 shape. I play it up, and then I go to my 2 shape. And then my 7 shape, and then my 2 shape. That simple, right? And then we bring it down. See what's happening? And so this will help you get comfortable maneuvering up and down the piano into different chord shapes so that you can improvise with confidence. All right, let's do a quick little improvisation on the F chord, then I'll show you how to improvise over the C chord using our 2 chord shapes, and then at the end of the lesson, we're gonna put it all together. Okay, so here we are on the F chord, and so you might create a little improvisation that sounds like this. Let's start in our 7 shape up here. Here we go. And maybe come down to your 2 shape. And maybe down to your 7 shape. And then up to the 2. And then up to the 7. See what I'm doing? I'm basically just inventing little melodies using each of these chord shapes. All right, before I teach you the 2 chord shapes that you can use on your C chord, if you're enjoying this lesson and you want to do a deep dive on this topic, check out our contemporary progressions and improv course over at pianowithjohnny.com. In this course, you will learn 14 amazing contemporary and pop chord progressions, and I show you a bunch of amazing techniques that you can use to improvise over these chords. So I'll put a link to that course below. All right, you ready to learn the chord shape for your C major chord? This is the 2nd chord in our chord progression. And so when you get to this chord, you're gonna wanna change your chord shapes because you're on a new major chord, right? It's like a C major chord. So what are the 2 chord shapes for your C major? Well, here's the first one. Isn't that beautiful? Okay, so we have B, C, D, and G. And this is our 7 chord shape because it's starting on the 7th note of the C major scale. So if we play all white notes from C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, it's built on the 7, and then we follow our formula from earlier, and if you recall, the formula was 7, 1, 2, 5. Okay, and so there it is. Doesn't that sound beautiful? You can also invert this chord up the piano. So if you take those bottom 2 notes and you put them on the top, you get this sound. Isn't that gorgeous? And I really like to play this chord lower so you get a little bit more of a cluster down there, okay? So I would encourage you to practice both of these chord shapes. There's the 7 shape, there's the 2 shape, the 7 shape, the 2 shape. And I'd play them all the way up and down the piano so you get nice and comfortable seeing these. And the more comfortable you are seeing these, the more confident you'll be as an improviser. All right, let's do a quick exercise to master these chord shapes. Here's how this exercise goes. Doesn't that sound beautiful? And it's basically the same exercise that we played on the F chord, but now we're doing it on the C chord, okay? So here's the C chord. We're starting on the 7, and we're walking up the 7 shape, and then the 2 shape, and then the 7 shape, and then the 2 shape, right? And then we take it down. you always got to think a little bit ahead of what's the starting note of the new chord shape. So in this case, you got to sort of think of, where the pinky's going for your chords. All right, let's do a little improv on the C chord, and then we're going to put the C and the F chords together for the full chord progression. All right, so here's the chord. Let's maybe start with the 2 chord shape, and let's start kind of low here. Okay, so here we go. Making little melodies. And maybe come up to the 7 shape. And maybe up to the 2 shape. You can do little slides. There's a 7 shape, and I'm kind of rolling down the chord. You can do these little rolls on both shapes. All right, in the final part of this lesson, we're gonna put both of our chords together, the F and the C, and I'm gonna show you how to improvise over these 2 chords using our chord shapes. So once more, quick review. We'll start with the F chord. What are the 2 chord shapes? The 7 and the 2. And then what about the C chord? The 7 and the 2. Okay, they're different chord shapes for each chord. So make sure when you're on the F chord, you're here, and then on the C chord, you're here. Okay, now the nice thing is that the chord shapes look very similar. So on the F chord, it's that. On the C chord, it's that. Okay, so they kind of have the same arrangement, you just play them in a different area of the piano. All right, let's do a quick exercise to combine our chord shapes. We're starting on the F chord, and here's how the exercise goes. We're gonna start on the 7 shape, go to the 2 shape, the 7 shape, and the 2 shape, and then coming down, we're gonna be on the C chord, so we're gonna change to the C chord shapes. So we'll start with the 7 chord shape, and then the 2 chord shape, and then the 7. Does that make sense? Okay. And so this exercise will help you combine all of your chord shapes. Here it is a little bit faster. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then down. 2, 3, 4, okay? And you can speed this up if you want. All right, let's go ahead and improvise using both of these chords, and what we're gonna do now is we'll play with the included backing track. This lesson comes with a downloadable backing track so you can play along with the band. You can also download the lesson sheet music you're seeing up here on the top left of the screen, and you can change the key of this entire lesson with the click of one button with our smart sheet music. So I'll put a link to all of that below, and let's go ahead and play with the backing track. All right, let's start on the 7 shape on the F chord. Here we go. And let's go to the 2 shape on C. And maybe the 2 shape on F. And the 7 shape on the C. Does that make sense? Now let's go to the 2 shape on the F. And the 2 shape on the C. And the 2 shape on the F. And the 7 shape on the C. Hey, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the lesson, please let me know in the comments. Also, be sure to check out pianowithjohnny.com. We have over 1,000 step-by-step lessons for all playing levels where you'll learn your favorite songs, styles, and how to improvise at the piano. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Yeah, that's really good sound on that. And it's so simple in terms of the structure of it, the way it's not easy to do, but it takes practice, but it is simple, which is good. Easy to explain, easy to describe, and easy to get started in doing it.
Oh, I was trying to practice it along with him.
Oh yeah. And like you said, he's got a downloadable backing track for that right there with the video. So that's Piano with Johnny. That's the page right there. And definitely worth a follow. And Tony's going to love that for sure. Lots of good piano stuff there.
Well, yeah.
We've got a few different approaches with some of the different guys we have.
the way he rolls, you know, he had those quick little rolls up and down.
Yep, all that little
Yeah,
stuff. Yeah.
that is a technique I need to practice.
And again, it has to do. One of his things that he mentions there is very important. Is it's not just scales up and down. It's choosing selectively. You're only choosing those notes. Now, interestingly, we leave the 3 out, so we're leaving out the major or minor third. We're playing the 1, the 2, the 5, and the 7 as the 4 notes that we're gravitating towards here, which is very cool because those will work all the time, and you're not really focused on the 3. You figure somebody else in the band is playing the 3. If there's anybody else in the band, if you have more music going on, somebody's playing the 3 somewhere to tell us whether it's major or minor.
Oh,
A lot of times the bass, I was just playing the root, but
playing with that scale, it gives it kind of like a lounge jazz kind of sound.
almost suspended too, because you've got that 7 and the 9 rather than, so it is almost like a sus2 because of the fact that 9 that we're putting in there could act as the 2, like you were saying, the 2 position for that C shape.
I knew I was gonna like piano with Johnny.
Oh yeah. And I knew you was gonna like it too.
Subscribed.
Done.
You
Perfect.
get a subscription. You get a subscription.
One for you, one for that guy over there.
Everybody gets one.
Yep. And there's a good reason for it, because just a really good presentation, and check these out. Yeah, I mean, there's just all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. He had me at cinematic.
Yep. And jazz stuff, and spice things up, things. Get breaking out of.
Gets into music modulation. Yeah. And I love the dual keyboard presentation.
Yeah. Because then you get the real notes being played, and you get the exact printout. Kind of like with the Ridiculous here, but yeah.
Well, I like when they do it like that because I see the fingers, their finger choices, and it's easier to read the notes themselves on the lighted keyboard on top.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
It's valuable to see like their hand approach.
Yep. Well, it's also like when you're looking at somebody playing guitar and you're watching the hands, like you can see where the hand is, but you're not sure which of those strings he's actually pressing down. Like you're not sure where, you might know the hands are here, but which notes is he actually pressing down? And that's where having the double keyboard is perfect, because it does show exactly which of those fingers are actually actively doing something at that moment.
How to riff on C.
Yeah. I mean, the important subjects, and just getting started with that is the big thing, because the minute you get over that hump of I can't just jam in C or whatever, you get over that, and all of a sudden, you're just jamming all day in whatever key you want, because it's just adding a little bit of complexity when you want to go from C to G to D and work your way around the circle of fifths.
I can't stop playing it.
Exactly.
It's true. Sometimes you get those progressions you just can't get out of your head.
Yep. Well, even in that little... I mean, that does get kind of catchy after a minute there. And like even just, switching from this key to the other, just doing that little thing. I mean, I could definitely feel that working its way into a whole thing.
The 251, I've heard you mention this one before too.
Oh yeah. And that was one I was talking about a minute ago. And actually that was one where, we were going to say something about, let's see. Yeah, we'll do that in a minute. But yeah, 251, that is, and basically it would be going from a minor 2 to a dominant 5 to a major 1. And in that way, for the guitar, those are the three types of chords that it's really important to understand and get under your hands, the claw for each of those. And once you kind of get those 3, you're pretty much set for most of music. There'll be diminished things that you'll have to do here and there, and other odd things you'll have to throw in from time to time, but all of those are based out of those first 3. So once you get that major 7, minor 7, dominant 7, and just major, minor, and dominant, you get those in mind, and then, you work from there and build out from that. So it's good to get those hand positions locked in.
Oh, and I will be checking this one out. Gospel piano.
Oh, yeah.
Big fan of.
And that's, again, going to get big into the progressions, because certain cadences will just sound gospel when you go from this chord to that chord or back and forth between these 2 chords. You'll hear them and you'll just recognize them right away.
Actually, just watching the thumbnail, I recognize this progression.
Exactly. And sometimes Amazing Grace is actually one that we were going to talk about for the vocal technique at one point, because they did Amazing Grace in up to 6-part harmony at one point, and it was a beautiful way to arrange it and a good way to see how the parts all break apart. But we'll look at that another time.
Oh yeah, that one would work great with layered choir.
Oh yeah. And that's the kind of thing you could build from the oohs and ahs on the synth also, just to get the idea of what it would come out as, and to build those parts. Because again, if you did decide to hand that to somebody and say, hey, can you do one or more of the high parts or one or more of the low parts vocally, somebody could cover that for you. And if you had those guide tracks already written in, like the parts are already laid out, whether it's a flute or a cello or whatever, something is playing that melody line, and then you can say, hey, play the, sing the cello part, and we'll mute the cello out, and you sing that line, and so you have the person sing that line, and then mute that part out, and in that way you can kind of build it up, and just replace whichever parts you want with voices as opposed to instruments.
That's why singers should learn a little bit of arrangement theory, and
Oh yeah.
and like the approaching, like, say a sax quartet or a string quartet, and the way that notes and melodies are arranged to make the chords across different instruments is useful information for a singer.
Yeah.
Who decides they're going to sing the flute part or the clarinet part.
Now let me just change the screen to like this for 1 sec. And what we'll do is, I was going to talk about that little 2-5-1 that I just did a minute ago, just to look at the notes real quick. Like this is a D minor 7. You can see what it looks like on the sheet music, how it's really easy to pick out visually, how it's just like just all the circles 4 in a row like that. But the fact that it's those notes, and then if we just take those top 2 notes and bring them down one each, one white note each, that's now an inversion of that G dominant 7. So it's a G dominant 7 over D. But all we had to do to get there was move those top 2 notes down. And then if we move those bottom 2 notes down, that's the C major 7. So to do the whole 2-5-1, we can just do it by having these 4 notes, bring the top 2 down, and then bring the bottom 2 down. And that way we didn't have to go jump around the keyboard. And now that we learned that in C, the key of C like that, because that's a 2-5-1, so we started on the 2, which was a minor 2, and then a dominant 5. We used an inversion, and then to the 1. And then we could change that to any other key and play it, as easily just by doing the same thing and moving, the top 2 down, then move the bottom 2 down to get to where you're going. So that's just one little trick that kind of popped out at me as something from one of those other demonstrations that seemed pretty cool.
It's like a keyboard hack.
Yeah, and it's similar to with guitar, how you can use like one claw here and then use the same claw on a different set of strings, and on this set it's a major chord, but then you bring it down here and it's a minor chord, that kind of thing. Same thing happens here, where you can take a particular position and just by slightly adjusting, make it all of a whole different type of chord, and very easily be able to switch between those and get a whole sound going. And in just knowing that you can keep your hand in that one position and just keeping track of which ones you have to move at any given moment, you could more easily build in a melody line with the right hand. And again, using his little claw right there in the 7 position or the 2 position, get little things going, and you're not having to do, it'll take a while to kind of get the 2 hands working together, but I think something like that makes it easier to kind of work your way into it slowly.
Yeah, me, it's the translation between the chord hand. My left hand, I do chords, but I tend to do 1-5s more than I do full-blown chords.
Sure. That's pretty common, actually, because spreading the chord out like that is nice. You do the 1-5 in the left, and then with the right hand, if you're splashing the 3 and the 7, or including them as well as 1s and 5s, that kind of makes, that gets the full representation, but it keeps the low end. It tells you that that's a C, because you've got the 1 and you've got the 5, and it's all down there, so it's just telling you that's a C. You're not doing that, because if you're doing that, you're telling it it's a root and a third. You're telling it it's a major C, but the 2 are kind of close together. When you get low, they sound kind of muddy when they're too close together. So the 1 and the 5 is kind of ideal, at least in my opinion.
Especially if you're rolling up and down a chord. I mean, 1-5 just sounds nice, feels nice, arpeggiates nice.
The other thing you would do would be the octave. It's also another thing, or the octave with the 5 in the middle.
That's my other go-to.
Those are the first things that I would go to on the bass as well. Like those are, you get those 2 and you kind of get them locked in to where you got the 1 and you can bounce to the 5 every once in a while, whether it's the 5 above or the 5 below. That's one that I like to do.
If I'm in a like stomping mode, then my left hand is like doing octaves. If I'm in a like swooping mode, then I'm doing fifths.
Yeah, and one thing that I love about watching my cousin Jeff play keyboard like I did the other day at the studio is watching, when he does the left hand bass part stuff, like he's actually doing like bass lines with the left hand. So it's like he's doing like do 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 do, like little approach tones and little surround things and just all kinds of things that I wouldn't necessarily be able to do, because I'd have to focus on that as the one thing I'm doing, as opposed to.
And you know why when he gets the most intricate, when he's playing electric piano.
Yep.
I noticed as like depending on what instrument he's playing on that keyboard,
Yep.
when he's on the electric piano, his left hand is like a whole nother bass system.
Yeah, and that's it's like the electric piano they have there, a little bit more than that even. It depends on how much bite there is. Like this one has more bite, a little higher, like chirp
Yeah,
almost.
he goes for those dreamy electric pianos, the ones that have that kind of almost sounds like a mixture of a Glock with a piano and a little bit of organ behind it.
Yeah, you get some good sounds out of that. And again, just the technique that he uses and the approach tones and like getting sweeps in and things like that, and being able to like take a sweep like that and like land at a chord. Like, being able to just kind of work your way up. Like that was one that I figured out at one point. Like I always thought that was, you do the chord way down here and you slide all those fingers all the way up and land all three of them in the right spot. Turns out the easy way to do it is just slide up with one finger all the way and then land, be ready to land that chord with the other hand. So.
It's funny, my piano teacher used to get pissed when we would do that, especially with the uprights, because sometimes they would.
Yeah.
Now
you have to be gentle. Yeah.
Now it's ridiculous. Like
the notes get stuck.
You can't do it with the MIDI keyboard if you're using ridiculous. Oh, there you go.
And for that, that's actually just the back of my thumbnail, essentially, is I just take the thumb and just kind of, and you go as fast or slow as you want. It sounds like a Galaxian.
It's not hard to make them stick.
No, when you're going that fast, definitely not. And I would have thought that things like big chords would have been more the way to do it. But they seem fine with that. Like, even though that's 6 notes.
I think it tends to get stuck more when it's got like, 2 that are right next to each other and it hits them too fast.
There's one. Got him. But yeah, sometimes they stick.
And that's been around a problem with MIDI going back to the beginning, back to the 80s. In the old days, stuck MIDI notes like the MIDI death button just to like force everything to stop.
Mm-hmm.
We used to have to hit that all the time with the first couple of generations of synths.
Force that reset. Still electric piano. I was looking for the clav. There he is. Gotta love the clav.
How's it going, Sauce? No, we're not taking links tonight, but if you DM over to Angified, the SR show tomorrow, he might be doing that.
Yep. Yeah, normally Thursdays are not link nights. We do
Or
more talking and playing.
Might still be putting together his list for tomorrow, so you get it over there.
They will take a look. I know Ange had a whole bunch of tunes that she had for the other day.
She had to make 2 lists this week.
Yep. And she was, the one night she was up until almost 1, 2 in the morning playing Link still. I was like, damn. Usually Pumpkin Time came midnight, but in this case, she was up late playing.
Whipped it out big time Wednesday.
I think the percussive organ is one of those that I really like for that kind of stuff also. It's got that nice upfrontness to it.
That's a good one when you have that like left-right kind of bounce.
Mm-hmm.
It works real nice for kind of getting a keyboard rhythm.
Mm-hmm. And that's the trick, is figuring out when to get the bounce in there versus when to get the bass line moving. And when you get a little simple pattern like that and you just kind of keep it rolling around like that. In this case, just kind of rocking the G and then the C, D, and E.
Go!
Charge! And checking out the different sounds.
Actually, that earlier we were writing that "fuck you" song.
Ah,
That's
yeah.
the perfect one. Da 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 da. Fuck
Fuck
you.
you. There you go. Fuck you.
Fuck you.
I'll keep that in mind for next time. I'll break that out. And then you get off into a whole tangent, you know, doom ba doom 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 doom, and get a whole thing going. Or we just turn it into a whole drum solo thing. But with those buttons, those little chiclet buttons, I can never get a solid groove going on these buttons. I can do a little bit here and there, but you just can't get enough.
I don't like
Not smooth
chiclet
enough.
buttons on my keyboards, and I don't like them on my computer keyboards.
Yeah, no. Nope. And
It's like the you remember the old clickety clackety keyboards back in the
I do.
80s?
I still
miss
have one
those.
around somewhere.
Yeah. It's a
They
shame
were
that
solid.
like we can't. They don't make those kinds anymore. And if
You
you
could-
do, Rick has one. He paid an arm and a leg to get one that had tactical feel.
Oh yeah, and that's the thing is, I mean, the ones that we used to have, you could drop them out of a helicopter and they'd be fine. I mean, they were built like steel tanks, the keyboards, but they started making them lighter and lighter, cheaper, this and that, and they just became more
it's
flimsy.
even-
And they are disposable essentially, but
It's even worse when you get to laptop keyboards. Like,
oh yeah,
they keep trying to like cram them smaller and less tactical feedback.
when I think about a laptop keyboard, what always comes to mind is Anne's typing angry. And I'm like, like just thinking about that poor, like if it was a laptop that she's typing on, it probably wasn't. But I'm just, when I think about that tiny little chiclet keyboard that just needs a tiny bit of force, and people type so angry a lot of times that they're just like, kabam, like into the innards of the machine each time they're hammering down a key. It's like, no, be gentle on the laptop.
She types like a metal drummer.
Yeah, but again, I'm not even, not saying it's her specifically, but just people who type angry like that on a laptop itself. That always drives me nuts.
Well, it's still better than like John on his phone. Like I hear a thumpa and a clicka.
Yeah, I did have ones in the past where it was actually I want to say it was that might have been that first compact that we talked about, that compact portable I had like way back when.
Big ass ones.
Yeah, and one of them had the key click was actually a software key click, so you could do like Control Alt plus to make it louder, or Control Alt minus to make it quieter. So I could go like you make it louder and then and then make it quieter and it's totally silent.
Software clicking. That's a gimmick.
It was kind of annoying because it wasn't a real click. It was more of like electronic, like a tick almost, and it was like I just got annoyed with it and immediately turned it off.
Yeah, it's
But
not.
it was a nice solid keyboard though.
It's not the sound that I miss from those keyboards. It's the feel. It's
yeah.
just like with the weighted keyboard. A cheap computer keyboard, when you're on it for 10 hours a day programming, doesn't feel good.
Now for me, it's the G15. So it's got the whole extra bank of G keys on this side.
Oh, is it Logitech?
Yeah. Yep, Logitech G510.
Yeah,
G510S.
I've got a couple of Logitechs. I mean, overall, they're not bad. They feel better than your average keyboard. But you pay a premium.
This one I like the fact that with all of those G keys on the side there, I was able to like redo macros for games and things where I could, instead of using the standard like WASD and then try to build a whole grip around that for a whole bunch of hotkeys, you could just make those 18 G keys to whatever you want. So I was like, okay, this one will be this and this one will be that, and it just makes it more convenient.
Those would be just as useful with the music software. You can map those keys to be a sample or...
Yep.
When you're looking at like those DJ controller tools and the Novation, you could basically build a Novation out of mapped keys on your keyboard and the software.
Yeah. Good stuff. And again, like most of the stuff that I have, even the ones that I have, like the Axiom, has a lot of controls on it to be able to do stuff. And like I haven't even scratched the surface of what I should be able to do with that bad boy. That's the one that has the good pads also, the bigger square pads. Instead of the little chiclet keys.
We should map that out one night.
Yeah. Just trying to get the camera back so we can take a little quick look at it.
And if you're doing it in Cakewalk makes it real easy to map those controllers because you hit learn, you hit it button, it's mapped.
Yep. But it's got the the big buttons there for the big pads, I should say, for the drums. You got those 8 right there. That would be the main thing for anything that we were going to be doing, like learning anything, or while you're going through to change parameters for anything. You could program all 8 of those to do whatever you want, and use those as primary controls. You
Plus,
could
you
set
can
up for
use
the mod wheel and all that.
you can use the play controls to control your DAW.
Yeah.
If you don't like having to do that stuff with the mouse, I'd rather have my play controls in front of me like that.
Yep. Now another thing, as far as controls go, is that the G15 also has a full set of play controls and a volume wheel right there as well. So like that, and it also has headphone jacks, headphone microphones. So like it can be its own sound card because it plugs in USB. So technically, it's another sound card that I actually never use, just because it's kind of awkward having those cables hanging off the back of the keyboard. If you're not, if the keyboard's up in my lap, it would be like hanging in a weird spot. But if I have the keyboard anchored somewhere, if I'm in a position where I'm hanging out, then it shouldn't be a big deal.
Well, that makes it worth the extra couple of dollars because if you get a second sound card with it, I can't have enough sound cards.
The other thing is that like right now it's lit up blue, but like it could be red or green as well. So you can just have the whole keyboard like light up in whatever color.
You know what they're starting to do?
Through different controls.
They're starting to put LED touch screens up there where you can make programmable LED buttons.
Yep, they had an entire keyboard that was built that way. It was kind of in the days right when they were doing the Bloomberg keyboards, and the newest generation of Bloomberg keyboards that came out were the ones that had all of the every button was a touch screen. So like you could have a fully programmed, any font you want, any language you want, any icons you want, or what have you on all the keys. It's pretty cool.
You've seen that with some of them smart programmable remotes, the OBS stream decks, like basically it's just like having a giant, tablet, but the buttons are broken up into sections.
Yep. Now, one thing
you can make the buttons look exactly like what you need them to look like, so when you press that button, it does this.
Yeah. And again, when we do a night when we're going to do the learning for the MIDI for that, we'll definitely get the Axiom involved with that. Well, also, I want to try to get the drums involved one day. Like, I know that the drums do have a MIDI output, a MIDI interface on the back, but I don't know if it will register as a MIDI kit and if there's any latency. That's the thing I have to double check, because if there's latency coming into something with that, that's one thing. If it's not, and it's good enough to be able to get like little, tremolo rolls and things like that going and have them sound right, because you know how annoying that could be. If it's like a little fraction of a second behind, it's like,
Yeah, and when you're dealing with USB 2, it's...
Yeah.
USB 2 was sufficient to like get MIDI serious, but it was right on the edge of zero latency. USB 3 is incredible. Like now the latency's gone.
Yeah. But if the devices are still USB 2, exactly.
If they're 2, you just got to have a really good responsive computer. Most of the time, the problem with 2 is just the computer processing it and getting it to the soft synth fast enough.
Now, in your case, it's also the fact that you've got like 812 hard drives connected along the USB chain, and they're all talking at the same time. So that's not helping you either, is it?
Well, I know with this Roland over here that the USB 2 is fast enough, because when I got this new laptop, I can run Halion real time, can play it fantastic. Nice. If I try to run Halion from my workstation computer with this same keyboard, it isn't fast enough.
Right.
So it is proof that the computer itself, this is i5 with 32 gigs, handles this keyboard much better with the USB 2 than my i7 actually does.
Yeah. And the question there to me would be, is it memory related or what have you as far as that goes? Like, memory, like you mentioned 32 gigs on that one. If the other one's like 8, then, that's a big difference right there. Yeah.
Well, and the memory factors in, especially with Halion, because it loads the samples into memory. So
right.
Some of these samples will take like 8 gigs just to load a piano.
Yeah, but that's one heck of a piano.
Oh, it's worth it.
Here's an organ. Just a little percussive organ. It does have that baseball field. Or hockey. Now, let's see. It's just about 11 o'clock. Everybody might want to do a little get up and stretch time, right? Move around a little bit. Don't want to stay seated for too long. But we got a video that we can jump into. That, let's see. We did the piano with Johnny. We didn't yet do the chord progressions.
Hook theory.
Yeah.
Like these guys.
Yep. And it's actually, that's a David Bennett, and it's sponsored by Hook Theory, because I believe they use Hook Theory for a lot of it. With this one also, since it is going through all these super common chord progressions, a lot of it is little clips of songs that are out there. So like he's demonstrating what the chord progression is and showing you like this is the 1, this is the 6, this is the 5, this is the 4, whatever, while the clip is playing. So they will be showing little pieces of videos, but like all of them should be like, 4 bars or less, or 6 seconds or less, or whatever. So it should just be tiny little pieces. So shouldn't really matter. But very good stuff, and it goes through a bunch of different chord progressions and different cadences that are quite common, and why they resolve the way they do, and that kind of thing. David Bennett piano.
Yeah, and we're always joking about how many songs can you make off of one progression.
And the first one he talks about is that Axis of Awesome, if anybody remembers that one, which is the old 1-5-6-4, which is one of the most common progressions. David Bennett piano, that's him.
Yeah.
And again,
David
tons
Bennett
of
piano on YouTube.
Yep. And you're subscribed. Yep. And there's lots of good stuff there. Yeah, we went over like 1 or 2 of his, and you're like, whoop, bip. Let me get on that.
I've
been
been
to
this YouTube channel.
Yes. Lots of good stuff.
7 super common chord progressions and why they work.
Video is sponsored by Hook Theory. Today we're going to take a look at 7 of the most common chord progressions that you'll find, particularly in pop music. We're going to have a look at how they sound, why they sound the way they do, and generally give you a good set of examples of songs that use this chord progression to make it easier to hear it in other examples. So let's start with probably the chord progression that you guys are all thinking of right now, which is the famous 4 chords of pop music, sometimes called the Axis progression, because it was famously made into a musical joke by the Axis of Awesome.
My life is brilliant, my love is pure. I saw an angel, of that I'm sure.
Well, that's just 2 songs that are similar. That's
forever young,
3 songs.
I wanna be forever young. I won't hesitate no more, no more.
So just there, you've already heard a whole bunch of examples of songs using this progression, particularly in music. I would say from the 1980s onward, it became increasingly popular to use this chord progression. And perhaps that popularity peaked around the late 2000s, early 2010s. It's hard to say exactly. I feel like it's less common today, actually, than it was 10 years ago. But there's loads and loads of songs that use this progression. And it's just a really great progression to loop, which is why it's used so often. Well, often when it's used in a song, it will be looped for an extensive period of time, potentially for the entire song. Why it works so well, in my opinion, is we start with the root chord, then we move away, as far away as we can really, from that root chord. We move to the 5th chord of the key. That introduces tension and motion. We now need to go somewhere. We can't just stay here. So if we wanted to wrap things up, we'd go back to 1. And now we sound completed, done. But that would be a bit boring. So rather than going back to 1, after the 5 chord, we go to 6, which offers a different type of resolution, not a full resolution. And then, rather than staying here, because once again that would be boring, we now introduce a bit more tension by going to the 4 chord. Now the 4 chord, much like the 5 chord, doesn't necessarily feel resolved. It doesn't want to stay here. So we need to go back somewhere, and that pulls us back to the 1 chord.
When I find myself in times of trouble,
Mother Mary comes to me. As I was there, I remember it all too well. Take on me. Never mind, I'll find someone like you. I wish just a small town girl living in a lonely world. Can you feel the love tonight? Moving, fucking moving, sleeps in my backyard since I got.
Let it go, let it go. Can't hold it back anymore. Let it go, let it go.
The next chord progression we're going to talk about is actually a very closely related chord progression to that first progression we talked about. This is 6-4-1-5. And why it's closely related is, as you may have noticed, it's actually the exact same chord progression as the first one, but starting with the 6th chord instead. It sort of becomes like a minor version, a minor key version of that famous 4 chord progression.
Gonna take a lot to drag me away from you. Whatever, go make things so complicated. I see the way you made for you. Throw my hand on a plate. If you're going to San Francisco tonight, fight the break of dawn, come tomorrow.
And actually, in that Axis of Awesome skit, that famous video, they use the fact that these 2 chord progressions are related to segue into the other progression, to sort of make their list of songs even longer.
When I come around, big on, will you say tonight? Gonna take a lot to drag me away from you.
This chord progression sort of works for the same reasons that the other chord progression that we looked at works. It's just a great balance of tension and release that allows it to continue looping around indefinitely if you want it to. I personally prefer this one over the first one. I feel like this has a slight, it's kind of more dramatic in a way. But yeah, like we were saying, the first chord, A minor in this instance, is providing a point of rest. The 4 chord introduces some tension. The 1 chord resolves that tension, but rather than remaining resolved, we then go to our most tense chord, the dominant chord, which forces the chord progression to continue. So we wind up in this perfectly looped chord progression that can just keep going around if it needs to, as long as possible. The next chord progression actually has a established name. It's rare that chord progressions have a well-recognized name, really, but this one does. It's the Andalusian cadence. Now, the Andalusian cadence is a chord progression associated, well, originally at least, with flamenco music from Spain, which is why it has the name Andalusian cadence, Andalusia being the southern region of Spain. But of course, it's not just used in flamenco music. It's used in a whole range of other styles of music. And what is great about this chord progression, it just has that sense of descending. It's a clear descending progression, starting on the 1 chord in the minor key, the flat 7 chord, flat 6 chord, and then the 5 chord. And we're getting the major version of the 5 chord, which helps us then pull back up to the 1 to continue the loop.
I love the colorful clothes you wear and the way that sunlight plays upon her hair. the girl you love and hold her tight, so happy together. As I walk along, I wonder what went wrong with our love, but that was so strong.
The next chord progression is actually very similar to the Andalusian cadence. It's just the last chord that has differed. So we're still starting on the minor 1 chord, going to the flat 7, going to the flat 6, but rather than then going to the 5 chord, going back up to the flat 7. I like to call this chord progression the Aeolian vamp, because it, in these 3 chords, effectively paints us into that Aeolian colour, the natural minor. And it has a less directional sound, I would say, than the Andalusian cadence, because we're not getting that 5 chord. The 5 chord undeniably wants us to go back home, but by avoiding that 5 chord, we remain in a sort of floatier space where we don't necessarily have to go home if we don't want to.
We could have had it all, rolling in the deep. You have my heart. There was a lady we all loved. He far wherever you are.
Now I've been waiting for this moment all my life. Oh Lord, oh Lord. You didn't have to cut me off because I can.
Every musician can benefit from being able to tell how to play a song just by ear. While ear training may sometimes seem like learning a new language, it doesn't have to be that difficult. Hook Theory have just released a really fun, really effective ear training game called Chord Crush. Chord Crush will play you a chord progression where only some of the chords are revealed to you, and you have to, using your ears, identify the missing chords. Even if you've never detected chords by ear before, Chord Crush starts you at the absolute basics and then will build up the difficulty as you progress. For a limited time, you can get 20% off a yearly premium subscription. Subscribe today at hooktheory.com/David Bennett. This next chord progression is sometimes called the doo-wop changes, or the 50s chord progression. It starts on the 1 chord, goes to the 6 chord, to the 4 chord, and to the 5 chord. And it's called the doo-wop changes, or the 50s chord progression, because it was very common in 50s doo-wop music. You can imagine it fits that style really well, doesn't it? But it's used in a whole range of styles, as you'll see in a minute. Why this chord progression is so effective, I think, is it's just a perfect little journey away from the tonic back to the tonic. So we start on our tonic chord of 1, then we move to the 6 chord, which is still a resolved sound. It doesn't sound like we now have to move anywhere. So the first 2 chords are sort of just different types of feeling resolved. But then the 4 chord, the subdominant, introduces a bit of tension. And then the 5 chord, the dominant, introduces a load more tension, which forces us back round to the beginning to continue the loop. Now, sometimes this chord progression is wrongly referred to as the Blue Moon chord progression. Blue Moon being a famous song which supposedly uses this chord progression, but it actually doesn't. The Blue Moon uses the 2 chord rather than the 4 chord, which is a very, very similar progression. D minor in this instance would be our 2 chord, which is very similar to our 4 chord, which would be F. They're only 1 note different. They both serve a subdominant function in the key. So both the Blue Moon progression and the doo-wop progression are very similar, but it's important to remember that they're not identical.
But I will always love you.
Earth angel, will you be mine? Happiness is a warm gun. When the sun rays your love, the Jesus are so very from the moon. None of the above, on steady tight love.
Generally speaking, the three most important chords of the key are the tonic chord, 1, the 4 chord, the subdominant chord, and the 5th chord of the key, which is the dominant chord. With just those 3 chords, you can create a whole sense of motion. The tonic is our home, the subdominant is a place away from the home but not yearning necessarily to return immediately back, but then the 5 really does want to go back. It's a point of tension. So the combination of these 3 chords gives us 3 different shades of tension, allowing for that sense of movement. So there are loads of songs written just using those 3 chords, and loads of chord progressions based on just those 3 chords. One I want to show you now is a chord progression that starts on the 1 chord, moves to the 5 chord, then goes down to 4, and then back up to 5. Very major scale sounding. They're all major key, all major chords. Sounds very upbeat, doesn't it? Very happy. But yeah, once again, this chord progression is used in a whole range of styles and can just serve as a really simple but effective bed to keep us in that major scale sound.
My name is Luca. I live on the 2nd floor.
Wonderland, your body's a wonderland. Tangerine.
Yes, I made a relationship in this life. Only want to.
Alright, stockings, cheap hair, cheap
When the night falls down, wait for you, you come around. And
The last chord progression I want to talk about is what I would call the Mixolydian vamp. It's a chord progression where we basically, just through the means of 3 chords basically, get painted into that Mixolydian sound. So we start on the root chord, in this example F, then we go to the flat version of the 7 chord, which is E flat. We then go to the 4 chord, B flat, and then we go back to 1. And this is enough to give us that Mixolydian sound, because Mixolydian is exactly the same as the major scale, but with the flat 7 degree. So the first chord establishes our home base, the root of the key, F. The second chord immediately gives us that Mixolydian sound by introducing the flat 7. Then the B flat gives us another place to go to, and then we return back home. It also has a very satisfying sound because between the flat 7, the 4 and the 1, we're moving by the same interval, a 4th or a 5th depending on your point of view. So effectively you could imagine it as moving around the circle of fifths. These chords are very closely related. And I think it results in a very sort of epic, open sounding chord progression. a big thank you, as always, goes to everybody who supports me on Patreon, including an extra special thanks going to these wonderful people.
Encore. David Bennett piano.
Yep, and like you said, I mean, you had no idea you knew how to play that many songs, right?
Oh, dude, apparently I know 10 times more songs than I thought I did.
And probably 100 times more than that.
Well, some of them surprise me. When I'm thinking of some of those progressions, because I'm familiar with some of them, I
Oh yeah.
never associated them to some of those songs.
Mhm.
They hold a little longer, like the Justin Bieber one.
Yeah.
He's just holding on the progression twice as long.
Yep.
But you realize it's the same progression.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing to me that struck me the most is the span of styles and the span of time. Like, songs from way back when, songs from very recently, like as far as it's not like they all came from one specific little time chunk
Yeah,
or time slice.
he actually made
They're from all
he
over.
made a good point about that. What was it? The 6451, and how it was like really predominant in the 80s. Like it came in and it stuck around for like 2 decades worth of music, and then kind of, it's a progression that got used in commercial music and eventually settled back into the background for a while. But don't doubt that there will be another round for that progression, because just like genres and music styles change over time, so don't which progressions are the hot ones for the moment.
Yep. But the things that he just talked about there about the 1, the 4, and the 5 being the 3 most important, I mean, that's really critical information to start with, because if you start there and start using the 2, 3, and 6 as minor chords as flavorings, and then that'll get you a good rounding on those first 6 chords. Because remember, we don't talk about the 7th chord.
The 1, 4, and 5
He
goes
nails it.
back hundreds of years. I mean,
Yeah.
that is like the roots of progressions.
hmm And when you start throwing in the 2, 3, and 6 and make them all minor, that keeps everything in the same key still. Everything's in the same home key. You're using the same notes for all of that. And that's before you get into the borrowed keys, where you start borrowing, instead of a minor 3, do a major 3, or instead of a minor 2, you do a major 2. Like, you can throw things like that out there to get something a different sound.
You know which one I found really, was it the
Andalusian.
Andalusian, which we looked at a month or so back, but hearing it in his example of all those different progressions, that one tickled my fancy the most.
Yeah, that's a very good one.
And
it has that, I want to say, not
unusual.
foreboding or darker. It is darker, I think,
Well,
than
he made
some of the others.
Another good point he made was like where you choose to end your progression. When you go up to that 5, it can sometimes cause you to go into a loop where it's like, oh, this makes me want to go back and play the progression again. When you're trying to,
and in a lot of cases, that's good though.
Well, it's great when you just you want to do a let it be, and the whole song is literally the progression. It's the kind of progression that lends itself to the loop.
Exactly. And that's one thing where, like, let's say the progression, like he was saying, we were starting with the 1, right? So if he's starting with the 1 chord and then going like a 1, 6, 4, 5 is one that you'll see pretty commonly, right? So you're going from that 1 to a minor, 6, and then you go into the 4, so you're getting that, and then the 5. And it's just got that nice, like it's got kind of a swinging feel, like you go from here to somewhere else, and then it really wants to come home, and then it comes home.
Yeah,
You know, so it's
the
like
five
everything
really
falls where
the
it should.
five really makes you want to go back to the C. Now, whether you repeat the loop is always the question in arrangement. How many
Yep. And
times do you want to play that progression before it's time for a change? And what do you do to come up with it? That's where the bridge is, you know.
The other question is, what happens if you actually start with the second half of that, or instead of like shift everything back by a chord? So instead of starting with the 1 and ending with the 5, what if you start with the 5 and the 1?
Yeah, reverse it.
Right. So like you're starting with the G, and then to the C, and then to the, I guess, what do we say, the 6 and the 4. And it's like, by doing it that way, that first one is if it feels like the 5 after that first go around, everything feels like you're actually a measure ahead of the bar almost, where it feels like it's rolling ahead of itself, because that 5 to the 1 feels like home, but that 1 is on the second bar instead of being on the first bar, so it kind of pushes everything ahead. So it feels kind of weird once it gets rolling. But
And reversing a progression is a great way to like extend and have kind of a bridge. You know, if you're doing this progression and you're doing it so many rounds, and you reverse it for a measure, that's a moment for change opportunity, where you bring
that
the
was what he talked about
progression
also, yeah.
back to the root.
Like when you're starting with that, probably the A minor. You're starting from that A, A minor to G to F, back up, back and forth right there, and just doesn't feel like it has to go anywhere else. Like it can just bounce back and forth there, so you have that sense of motion, but you also have sort of a sense of a home as well.
Yeah, it can make it feel like it's going up and then coming back down.
Yep. And if we combine that with what we were looking at earlier, with the whole, start mixing things like that in with those little progressions and just getting those little chords in the same places, and all of a sudden it starts to build into real music. And it's like, what?
That's where real music is. Son of
That's
a
where
bitch.
it starts like leaking out of your fingers, and it's like, oh my god.
Oh, it's been leaking out of my brain from the moment I recognized what music was.
Oh yeah. And like I said, he's got tons of good videos there on David Bennett piano, and that was a longer one, 20 minutes or so. Hope everybody was refreshed before we started that, and was able to check all that out, because again, lots of good stuff in there, and just the way that all those different progressions are. He's got other ones on interesting time signatures and how to recognize different progressions, or how to recognize different intervals.
And he really analyzes, music in a great way, like from the progression perspective, the arrangement perspective, similarities, like all these songs that are actually doing this. He's really wise for his young age. That's what I was thinking. I was like, son of a bitch, this guy knows like my music professor's knowledge, and he's just breaking puberty.
That might be an older video too, so don't be. And he also might just look young.
Well,
maybe he's in his 50s.
If he knew that when he's that young, it still says something about how impressive his knowledge is.
Yeah, definitely not taken away from him for sure. But imagine if we had his knowledge at that age, where we would be now. Like that's what blows my mind, because I did not have a strong grasp on most of theory and most of how to put things together until very, very recently, and it's all still kind of coming together.
Do
But
you see this? Why does Germany have an H note? I'm gonna have to have a talk with Antiphone.
you tell him what the H is going on here.
Yes, I had no idea there was another note.
Is it another note, or is it another name for the same note?
I'm gonna have to watch that one after. Yeah. Inquiring minds now want to know. Oh, and this is another one. One night, we should just do a blast music theory, because I have come across so many videos on YouTube where learn music theory in 30 minutes, which he's
Yeah, yeah.
saying 29, so he's actually
yep.
even shorter.
And again, like I watch all of those, even though because I mean I know most of that is review for me at this point. But again, some of them just put it together in a certain way that things click better, or it just has a better visual where it just stands out. Like that, even just that one on the thumbnail, what that's showing you is that if you're playing D F sharp A, you've got a major third here and a minor third there. So the major third is purple, the minor third is green, and then if you play a minor, a D minor, you get a minor third here and a major third there. But that's how you build any of the major and minor triads. Is just when you've got a major third and then a minor third gets you to the fifth, or a minor third and a major third gets you to the fifth.
And I like to watch these, even if I do know what they're talking about in the cases theory. I like to watch them, like you said, for their approach. And today's learning techniques are evolving, and these guys are just making it so much easier to pick up on things that used to take decades to soak in.
And it's not that there's just one right answer either, or one right way to look at it. Like everybody has different ways that will click for them. Some people are more visual, where just a little visual like that would be something where, oh, boom, all of a sudden it clicks. Same thing with, when you're looking at the key of G flat, is it sharps, is it flats? Well, it could be both. And when you look at the keyboard and you think about which notes become sharp and become flat as you go around, and you realize that it's all the same notes, even though you have different names, it kind of blows your mind when you realize you're looking at the same thing, whether it's this many sharps or this many flats.
One player's sharp is another player's flat.
It depends what you're trying to do, yeah. And it depends what you're trying to work with. And especially, main thing it depends on is what's the home key that you're dealing with. And ideally, if you're not playing some really weird music, like you've got a good idea of what the home key is.
See,
sometimes it just floats around. You have no idea what's happening.
I've actually wondered about this. Songs that key change up a minor third. Gonna be visiting him again.
Absolutely. And like I said, lots of good stuff there. Mixed Lydian flat 6 over on the left there. Voice leading, that was a really good one for arranging with the voice leading. That's where you're talking about keeping chords, having that top line give you the melody that you want by taking, by arranging the chord, just dropping tones to the bottom, or bringing them from the bottom to the top to get the chord to fit in the position that you want it to be, to have that melody line going across the top.
Yes. David Bennett piano. Check them out.
Yep. Excellent.
It's nice
Always
to
a
get
pleasure to see stuff like that.
Yeah, it's nice to see more piano on Talkin Shhh I.T.
Yeah. And this one wasn't even so much about piano, playing techniques or anything, but more using the piano to go over songwriting, which is beautiful because you don't have to be an expert pianist to appreciate even those little progressions there. Like just seeing how he played them and seeing how you can get things to happen very easily, just with a little bit of a chord and a little bit of a line in the left hand there. He was getting a good mimic on what song he was trying to go for there.
Yeah, I like both the song analysis and from the piano mentality. For me, it's like a double win.
Yeah, absolutely. And we did have 2 then so far for piano tonight. We have another that is for guitar a little bit, I think, right? We had that one for...
Can't ignore our guitarists.
Can't ignore that. That one is about tone and volume knob secrets. And that's one that was Elliot, I believe, right? Let me see here. I think I have that page open still on this side.
No pedals allowed.
Yeah.
Here it is.
And I have things playing in the background. Yeah, no pedals allowed. That was the one.
At this point in history, there's so many wonderful players.
Play. I didn't say play, I said go.
That's 2 different things.
So this is Elliot Klein.
Yeah, there you go. And this is he's using a guitar that has a 5-way switch, so it's like a Stratocaster style. It's a PRS Silver Sky, but the idea is that with different positions of the pickup, with different positions, you're listening to different pickups, let's say, and they attribute or contribute to the tone. And he's going to go over different methods of using the tone controls and the volume controls to get different sounds, and how to use these different sounds in different ways.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the volume knobs and on your guitar, that's an effect technique. I mean,
absolutely, And it's one of the things that I'm lacking as you know, that I know that my technique from playing like is mostly I would play with my guitar with no effects, playing through my headphones, so it's not loud in the room. So I have no idea of how it sounds through an amp, or how, like, you know, how hard I play through an amp and all that. So whenever I play through an amp, I'm always a little bit gun shy when I first, you know, hook up and start playing, because I'm not used to it being loud in the room. And so I have to get good, you know, really good at my muting and everything, and that's where playing with a really loud tone through a pedal might help for me, just to get, you know, more accustomed to playing loud and not worrying about it. But that's something I have to work on.
And it's something I've noticed that, like, guitarists who tend to do more recording and things like that don't tend to utilize it as an effect as much as, say, guitarists who play live all the time.
Yeah.
And are looking for those live dynamics that sometimes it's easier to swoop the volume that way than it is to do something with your feet.
Yeah, and the guys that are really good with that, like being able to, whether it's little adjustments to the pedal board, whether using their toe to make an adjustment on the pedal board, or whether they play a couple notes and then like bend down real quick and make an adjustment and come back up. You know, the guys who can do that kind of stuff, it's really cool to see. And, you know, especially when they're going through a bunch of different tones, you know, getting the wah effect here, or getting a chorus effect there, and, like, you know, I know a lot of that is just clicking this and then clicking that, and no big deal. But when they're able to actually dial everything in really well, and sometimes you click this in and it's too loud, so you got to pull it back a little in the volume. Just watching all those little nuanced changes is cool.
Yeah, it'd be awesome if you could program each toe for like a different function.
Well, we did see actually the one, who was it? It was at the 8x10. It was a video that we watched of a live performance at the 8x10. They didn't have an audience because it was in the middle or early in lockdown, but they had just opened the bar for the band to play there. Moody Moose, I think it was.
Yeah, Moody Moose. They made a killer, like,
it was a great production. Show. Like the light show, the video angles, like all of it, the camera cuts, like all of it was really cool. The one thing was that the lead,
that guy played with his bare feet.
With his bare feet, in order to be able to, you know, dial things in on the pedals like that, or just to be more comfortable in general, hanging out on stage.
I saw him like using his big toe or something.
Yep. Basically, you need a little bit more effect, and you know it's that knob right there, so you can just get the toe right on it and just kind of.
Well, they're like little fingers.
Yeah, exactly. Good stuff though. And this is again, he's using a Silver Sky, so PRS Silver Sky, beautiful guitar. Same layout as a Stratocaster, with three pickups and a 5-way switch, selector switch.
So this really helps for what he's trying to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So no pedals allowed.
Exactly.
We're doing this old school.
Old school.
On weed.
Back of a 20 on weed.
In history, there's so many wonderful players, so much wonderful gear, and so many ways to learn all these wonderful techniques and styles. Even with all the techniques and wonderful gear and wonderful guitars, there's still one area of playing that I rarely see brought up. That area is using your volume and tone knob. Basically the built-in pedals of the guitar, and not like Matt Bellamy's built-in pedal in his guitar. If you like what you see here today, please hit that subscribe button, check out my Patreon, reach out for lessons. Whatever you can do to support is really appreciated. There's different reasons to use your tone and volume knob depending if you're doing like kind of a short scale thing, a tele thing, a Strat-like thing, and today I'm going to be taking a Strat-like guitar through its paces. I'll be using a preset I recently made of a high-powered tweed, and we'll be using clean all the way to super dirty tones. So let's start with the neck pickup, which in this setting is going to be kind of bright, but not unusually bright. These aren't even new strings, and it's still decently bright. That's wonderful if I want to cut through a mix or something, but if it's kind of like a nice tender opener, or maybe like a breakdown right before, like a kick in the distortion kind of solo, it's a tender moment, I might not want that kind of aggression. Let's try the same kind of approach, but with the tone on 7. Still has like aggression in the playing, still kind of, you know, but it's not gonna, at certain loud volumes, kind of spike and really hit you in the face. I can play a bit more tenderly if I want. I can still hit hard, but have that extra room not to not to just blow someone's hair back. like happened to me a long time ago. This is all because someone's bridge pickup was way too bright. Now let's move that tone knob to 5 and get like a really nice and chill sound. It almost borders on jazzy. It's not like full jazz humbucker or anything like that, but it certainly is a lot different than full-on tone knob, right? So much less in your face, and you can use a boost or something, just a small boost to compensate for that like volume drop. Now you could roll the tone knob all the way down to 0, but I normally just do these 3 to kind of get these 3 moods from each pickup. So onto the 4th position. The 4th and 2nd position on a Strat, depending on the amp you're going into, can be really brutal. Sometimes you might want to like cut through a mix or something. But that might be a little intense sometimes. So let's do that same one down to 7 on the tone knob. Now let's check out the tone knob on 5. Much more chill and a bit more delicate and vulnerable, I think. So onto the middle pickup, or 3rd position. As I've mentioned in previous videos, I kind of see this position as like an acoustic sound. Here it's going to be pretty bright though. Pretty bright, not necessarily ridiculous. Like if there was a keyboard player and another guitar player, I might just leave it there. But let's try it at 7 now. Quite a bit sweeter, and almost, again, in my opinion, if someone forgot their acoustic, I might go with this sound to like open a song. And for due diligence, let's do the tone knob on 5. Significantly more relaxing. I know you might not always want a relaxing tone, but that's what tone knob at 10 is for. So when it comes to the 2nd position, I wouldn't necessarily touch the tone control that also does the neck. I would do the one that just does the bridge. And at most I might take it down to 7 or 5, only if it's super bright though. So if we're doing something like... I had to. What do you want me to do? Say that was too bright, I dial it down just a hair. Kind of takes that edge off, especially if you're going into a really bright amp. Now onto the bridge, and there's obviously a qualifier here. This is a Fralin Hot Split Blade. It's pretty unusual looking pickup, but I had it hot so I didn't have all those highs, and I had it silent because I hate a lot of noise, especially when I'm on like the pickup that I would use all the distortion on. So although this pickup is going to be pretty muted in those highs, let's check it out just in case. Depending on the amp I'm going through, there might still be a little bit too much there. And so again, tone knob down to like 8 or 7. Let's do 8. Just a little lower. Really sweetens it up, and that's super important when we get over to a distorted tone. So here we have another high-powered twin, but it's cranked and with the pedal pushing it even further. Now I think it's already relatively warm, but I might want the tone knob at 8 just to make it a super sweet sound. So here's tone knob full out. And with the tone knob at 8. So as you can see, it's a sweeter sounding tone, just a hair though. So it's one of those scenarios where if I'm soloing and I boost my sound and I'm like, oh, that's a little brighter than I thought, a quick turn to the tone knob to 8 solves that problem. 8 or just lower. Now the volume knob is a similar world, but it's kind of its own thing. So let's say I dial in a nice crunchy sound with a neck pickup. Sounds good to me, although let's try the tone knob down at 7 just to see how it sounds. Quite nice. There's still a volume decrease with the tone knob, it's just not as immediate as when you're using your volume knob. So here's the volume at 10. Down just a hair. A little higher. Full. That'll make a big difference if I'm playing pretty loud, and it'll also make a big difference if I want like a pretty aggressive intro and then I don't want to touch anything for the verse when someone's singing or something like that. I just want to take a hair of volume down, a hair of highs down, get a more mellow sound, and then maybe for the chorus or something, go back to the volume at 10. I think it's a bit simpler and sometimes a bit more fun for me to not necessarily dial in the perfect sound for every single section of a song, and instead just kind of use my tone knob and volume knob, or tone knobs and volume knob depending on the guitar, to be able to alter my sound as needed. Again, I can't really add reverb with these knobs, so for something like cascading rivers and oceans of reverb or something like that, obviously I need to dial that in. But for something like a tamer sound and then a louder sound, I can do that all right here. So this might only be on a Strat style guitar, but as you can see, we can get a lot of different sounds using just a clean tone and a super time to rock tone. The usability of the tone and volume knob are also going to be a little bit more apparent if you're playing at a louder volume. If I'm playing at a nice, in my apartment volume, I wouldn't really need to turn my volume down past 7 maybe even 8. But if I'm playing super loud, I could turn it down to 3 and I'd still hear a pretty clear signal. So I think it's worth experimenting with, and I hope you do this week. Get your inner Jeff Beck, Joe Bonamassa, Derek Trucks on, maybe dish the pick, and play with the volume and tone knobs and try to dial in some sounds that you might not have thought of otherwise. So thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you all next week.
Elliott Klein. And some great points right there as far as getting that stuff in there. Trying, experimenting is the main idea. Try different things out. Without the pick is a good choice, like doing the finger style and dialing everything in there.
Oh, and that guitar, is it Paul Reed Smith?
Yep, PRS Silver Sky.
Are they part of Fender?
I don't think so.
Man, it sounded like a Strat.
It's got the Strat feel. I mean, it's got the Strat look and the Strat feel and all of that.
It's got the sound.
It's its own thing, though. Like Paul Reed Smith, the PRS, like you'll always recognize them from the inlays. Like if you looked at the neck of the guitar and you saw the little birds, the flying birds, that's one of the signature things that you'll see on a Paul Reed Smith, the PRS. There was one guitar player that played in a band that we worked with many years ago, and the lead guitar player in that band, I think, had 4 or 5 PRSs. That was his main thing. Like he was, his name was Chris, and he just had, all of his guitars were PRSs.
And that tone sculpting that he's doing there, it's got a treble pickup, a bass pickup, and the one in the middle.
Not really treble, bass, and middle. It's more just where they're positioned. Their positions are neck, bridge, and then in this case, since they have the third one, the one in the middle. But the main idea is that there's a 5-way blade switch that you can throw into one of 5 positions. And so he was going through the different positions for that. Like for my guitar, I have on the SG only 2 pickups. So I have a 3-way switch, which basically means that I can be on the neck pickup only, the bridge pickup only, or both pickups. And for his guitar with a 5-way switch, you have the choice of just the neck pickup, the first 2 pickups, like the neck and the middle. Then you've got the third position is all 3 pickups. Then you've got the fourth position is just the middle and the bridge pickup. And then the fifth position is just the bridge pickup. So you can listen to, individual pickups, or you can listen to all of the pickups, or you can listen to this pair, that pair. Like you can get different things going on. The one he started with was just the neck pickup. And when he was picking right over the neck pickup to get the brightest sound out of that pickup. Because by picking directly over it, you kind of get the strongest signal. But you might also, if you want more of a twangy sound, you would pick further back and you would still be able to get a good signal, but it would just have a different tone quality to it. But I thought it was a good walkthrough of the different settings and giving good examples. He's a great player, as you saw, and can give good examples of you'll be able to hear the difference between having it at 10, having it at 8, having it at 5. Like those are good ranges, 10, 7, 5, whatever it was. To figure the approximate ranges of what it sounds like there, and just keeping it in those ranges. I usually keep my stuff wide open, just because, again, I'm usually just playing through my headphones, so the tone doesn't matter as much. I'm just playing to work on scales and to work on positions and work on the things I'm trying to do there. Yeah, there you go. So this switch at the bottom here is the blade switch, and that has those 5 positions. Right now it's in position, it's all the way on the bridge pickup, so that's only that diagonal pickup up top, the one that's right by the whammy bar and the end of the strings. That's the only pickup that's being listened to right now, because the switch is in the position all the way down there. If it was all the way on the other side, it would only be listening to the neck pickup, the one that's right by the fretboard. And if it was, in one of those positions 2 or 4, close to either side, that would be listening to these 2 pickups or those 2 pickups. And then the middle position, like I said, would be, I think the middle position is wide open, but it might only be the middle pickup. I'm not 100% sure on that. But then as far as the controls over here, you've only got these 3 controls. So that would be the volume control and the tone controls.
And this is really where you're controlling, in the case of guitars, electric guitars, this is where you're controlling your sound at the instrument level.
Correct, yeah.
Everything you do afterwards is processing, and you get a sweet tone here. Those effects work better.
One thing I will say is that if you took a couple of different guitars, for example, that were identical guitars, and you dialed them in differently, it would still be a question of the fingers or the pick attack. That also has a lot to do with the tone. So like dialing it in is important, and it's hard to get the tone you would be looking for without having it dialed in well. But there's also the amount of aggressiveness of the attack that goes into it, whether you're playing with a pick or whether you're playing finger style, if you're doing bends, where you're picking, like I said, where you're fretting, like all of those things also affect it. So it's important to try a lot of, like I said, experiment and try different things to see what feels right. That neck style, as you saw up there, the headstock has those pointed corners. Also, you'll see in the image on the right. That's kind of a signature thing there as well. Like you were saying, the difference between the Fender and the PRS. One of them is that headstock style, where it's kind of pointy.
And they show you the wow, nice.
There you go. So yeah, the middle position is just the middle pickup, like I said. Yeah, there you go. So the first time I said it wrong, where I said it was all of them, just the middle. Makes more sense. All of them would be too much. Much love, but we don't take SoundCloud links at all. If you had a BandLab link that you wanted to send, you could DM it over to Angified, and she could use it for a different show, one of the other nights for the week. But we don't take links at all during our shows. Thanks.
We're going to be wrapping up in a couple minutes. I need an Ange like pumpkin
Yep.
mask.
Yeah. We're right at the end here. But the silver, it's a beautiful guitar, though, as you see.
Hell yeah! Like I like some of their designs here.
And that is, like he said, the Strat style is what you would call that, because the 3 pickups in that configuration.
Yeah, that's a guitar I've seen pop up here and there, and
you see the inlays I'm talking about, right? The flying birds on the.
I was assuming it was a Strat at first. Like
Yep.
I'm looking at it, I'm like, it sounds like a Strat, it looks like a Strat, it
Yep.
must be.
The big things to look for is the headstock is definitely not Fender style, and the inlays are the birds for the PRSs.
Yeah. Those were the things that kind of threw me off. I'm like, I see the signature in the middle. I'm like, did Fender make a special?
PRS. There's a documentary, I believe, on the whole history of the thing, and I saw part of it at some point. I can't believe I can't remember more of it, but there's definitely some information out there about the origins of the Ball Reed Smith and how it is that similar to the Stratocaster, for example.
Well, we will have to check into that more. I love Strats. As far as guitars go, it's the one that I want.
Now, the one that I have that is of that style is an Epiphone Strat. So it's basically, same as what you would see as a Fender Strat, but it's an Epiphone. And it was from at least 20 to 30 years ago. And again, it was off-white when I first got it, and I sanded it down by hand completely. I took it all completely apart, sanded it down, knew nothing about what I was doing, painted it with like model car paint or whatever, like metallic flake blue, and then put a clear coat over it, but put it all back together. I mean, it's over at the studio at Joey's house, and it is my one Strat style guitar that I have. But I do have a whole pre-wired pick guard over here that I can try for another Strat style guitar. All I have to do is get a good body and neck to work with there, and I can make that a Franken guitar. So I got that to work with. A Franken guitar. But I also, I usually, the SG suits me fine for just about everything. And that's where some of these videos, like this was Elliot Klein. We've seen others from some other guys where they do getting all the sounds from a Telecaster or getting all the sounds from a Stratocaster, or like the same idea as this, where they go through, tone controls and switch positions and what you would use different ones for. Like for a more aggressive song, you might do this, or for a more laid back, chill sound, you would do this, and they give good demonstrations. But the fact that they did it for a Telecaster, they did it for an SG, they did it for a Strat. With each one, it's kind of like, if it's the only instrument you have, you can get all of the sounds that you really want to get. Yeah. There's really not something that like kind of pushes you out of that kind of the ability to do a lot of those things, because these are very versatile instruments that you can do a lot of things with.
Yeah, and like we said, sculpting your tone on your guitar just complements or lends to any sculpting you do post through an effects processor.
Yep.
You will get a different effect if you adjust your tone.
Yep. You will. And the importance of getting a clean input, like rather than doing all the effects out here and just recording that where you don't have a dry signal now that you can't do anything with. To me, it's better to actually get the recording in as clean as you can and then deal with the effects. It's not as important how it sounds in the room as it is to get the clean signal in to work with.
Those effects will sound better the cleaner your initial signal is.
Yep, but again, the tone crafting is important because you want the right tone driving into those effects once they get in there. So like when I watched Jason do some of the earliest guitar parts that he was doing, where with all the effects on, it sounds super heavy and fills the whole space, and then when he's doing it just when you're not hearing that and it sounds like it's just him playing in the room, it's just do 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 do. It sounds so different.
It blows my mind to hear like the original track and then what it turns into with him. It's
With the
like,
click
oh
of a
my
button, like,
God.
okay, turn the effect on, turn the effect off, turn the effect on, and you can hear such a difference in that track. But understanding, he's seeing the final product when he's doing the input, and that's the important thing, is understanding how much of an attack he needs to do, the aggressiveness, all of that stuff is all built in to what he's doing, even if it doesn't sound that way because it's not plugged in technically for what he's hearing, but he knows what it's gonna sound like once he puts the effects on it. That's the part I like.
Yeah, that's why it's good to know what you're trying to do. Like,
And important to experiment, to try the things.
If you know what your intentions are with the sound or riff or track, it makes it that much easier to get it.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times we just kind of neander our way into the sound, like I'm trying something.
Mm-hmm.
But when you are determined and you set up the perfect track to start, getting all the intended results, piece of cake if you watch Jason.
Yeah. And again, some of the stuff that we went over tonight was about the progressions and the ability, songwriting stuff, where you realize you know so many more songs than you realize, and that's where recognizing intervals and recognizing progressions when you hear them is important. That's one of the ear training things that he talked about also with hook theory. That was a good resource and a good notion, the notion of being able to recognize these progressions, because that's how we're able to jump into songs so quickly. When you start, you hear something going on, you can find yourself a root note. Okay, sounds like they're in A, and then from there, okay, I'm hearing.
Well, recognizing a progression.
Mm-hmm.
Recognizing a progression. If you start hearing songs and start realizing, like, oh my God, this is that progression,
Mm-hmm.
You're doing good.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that's what I hear usually, like, as I'm just hanging out, and that way, once I do figure out, like, okay, now all I got to do is figure out which of these 12 keys they started in, right? Like, which major key of, from C to B flat, from C to B, like, which one are they in? And then once okay, that one, and once you hit it, then okay, from there it's a 1-6-4-5, or it's what it sounded like, and you try it and say, okay, well, maybe it wasn't a 1-6, maybe it was a 1-5-4-6, or whatever. Like, you figure out what they did once you get into it, but you know that it's all related to that first note, so you know what key you're in, you know how many sharps there are, and you can build out from there.
Some of the videos I've been searching for future episodes are all about like quick ear training, like
Nice.
recognize something instantaneous, and progression recognition gonna be coming soon to
Yep, progression and interval.
IT near you.
Yep, and interval recognition, like recognizing that, like, that's a 6 because you're going to a C to an A, and if you do it this way, it's a minor third because the A and the C are that close together. He was talking about that before, when you flop the two. It's like the same notes, but when you relate them this way, it's one thing. When you relate them the other way, it's the other thing. Same thing with the C and the F. Is a fourth, and then this way, it's a fifth. So it's all just about, how they relate to each other, and even the same notes will sound different if you invert them because the interval flips.
Yeah, we'll have to do a little segment called Recognize.
Yeah, there you go. Intervals and progressions and
Everything.
other things. Yeah.
The quicker you can, the easier it gets to making the music after.
Absolutely.
That was highly educational, man.
Yeah. Thanks for everybody for joining us tonight. It was definitely cool. Definitely good to get some of these out there. And again, these are excellent resources. Make sure you support the channels of all these guys, because you'll find just tons of good information there and stuff that, again, you never know which thing is going to actually be what sticks, or which is going to be an epiphany all of a sudden. It could be out of a video that 90% of it is all review, and yeah, I know this is major, this is minor, blah, blah, blah. But then you get to that one little nugget, it's like, oh, that, and all of a sudden something makes more sense, and you're forever changed because now you know that.
Oh, and with some of them, you find one thing that you're curious about, and next thing you know, you see related curiosities. Like,
Yep.
I just jump down rabbit holes sometimes with their playlists.
Yep. And the ability to make your practice more interesting. The fact that you're able to experiment with more things just from some of these things that we talked about now, even the different hand positions, the different ways that you can make a chord progression work, just taking any chord progression you've already done and trying some of these different techniques can open up whole new worlds where you could now sit there and entertain yourself playing, where before you would sit down and play 10 minutes and be like, whatever, and step away because you were uninspired, let's say. In this case, keeps you interested.
I love when I can't get up.
Exactly. But we'll have to leave it at that and come back for it next week.
Tune in again tomorrow night, the SR show.
The SR show, Friday night. And we'll see you next week on Talkin Shhh I.T. Good night.
Whatever.
Ambient noise, yeah.
So now you're grabbing some band lab clips.
Yeah.
Now for me, that would also be something where I would use like volume automation and like bring that from the bottom, like bring it in and then bring it back out.
And these are the kinds of sounds you can scratch. With this AI, like scratching it actually can be cool.
Oh, that was perfect for the interlude too.
Ends it right in the
I
right
didn't
spot.
even notice. 40. I didn't even realize the texture faded out at the interlude until it happened. I'm like, wait a minute.
Sometimes you just, it was just meant to be that way.